Chapter 1236. Rue actually stole money. After Han Yunxi explained the situation, not only did Long Fei Yi laugh, but Gu and Tang Li also couldn't help but laugh. It was the first day of the new year, and Rue was caught stealing money. Tang Li coughed lightly and said seriously, "Brother, you can't spoil him for stealing money. You must teach him a lesson." Long Fei Yi, Han Yunxi, and Gu all glared at him, including Ning Jing. Did a child who wasn't even a year old know what money was? Little Tang Tang understood and casually stared at the red packet. Rue didn't understand. It was his first time receiving a red packet this year, and it was even his first time seeing banknotes. Previously in Yuning Palace, he had only seen Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi reward the servants with broken pieces of silver. Long Fei Yi was about to speak, but Gu was the first to flare up. He stared coldly at Tang Li. "Say that again." Tang Li was a fellow with a short memory. As soon as he had a daughter, he started showing off. He'd already annoyed Long Fei once. If this kept up, heaven knows if Long Fei would kick him back to the Tang clan. I was just joking. You guys, don't be so serious. Tang Li's mouth twitched. He was afraid of these people. It's not to the extent of stealing money, but it's certain that he stole something, Long Fei Yi said objectively. Tang Li was convinced by this, and so was Ning Jing. Although Han Yunxi didn't want to admit that her precious son had stolen things, she still nodded. If it was a daughter, she could spoil her a little. But when it came to her son, she should be ruthless. However, Gu was indignant on behalf of Rue. How could a child who wasn't even a year old distinguish so clearly? Rue didn't take things from outsiders. He might not even care if they were given to him. He had only taken his mother's things. Did he know what these things were for? Would he be able to tell whether it was his mother's or his? Gu took Rue from his arms and let him sit on his lap. He was so angry that he didn't want to speak. It was fine if Tang Li made a joke, but Long Fei Yi's attitude. Was it necessary? Rue was confused. He knew the word steal, but he didn't understand it very well. In the past, if there was something I didn't understand, would look to Grand Tutor. Now that Grand Tutor wasn't here, he looked to Imperial Father and Imperial Mother. Long Fei Yi got up and walked over. He squatted in front of his son and asked seriously, "Rue, do you know what steal is?" Rue nodded. Long Fei Yi asked again, "Then do you know what fight is?" Rue shook his head. Rue, don't take things that don't belong to you no matter how much you like them. Got it? Long Fei Yi said seriously. Perhaps Rue would understand better if he used the word take. Sure enough, Rue nodded. Long Fei Yi smiled and said, "But you can fight. If you win, it's yours." Hearing this, Gu Qishao, who was about to refute Long Fei, shut up. He agreed with Long Fei Yi's last sentence. If you like something, fight for it. Fighting was a great skill. Who do you fight with? How do you fight? Can you fight? On what basis? What is the bottom line of the fight? What comes after fighting is abandoning and cherishing. Rue didn't understand these things even now. However, Long Fei Yi knew that he would have to teach him in the future. Perhaps he would teach more. Perhaps Han Yunxi would teach more. Perhaps Gu Beiyue would teach more. He was good at fighting in the dark, Han Yunxi was good at fighting in the open, and Gu Beiyue's realm might be higher. He won without fighting. It was easy to fight for the world, but difficult to defend. How much fighting was hidden in the word defend? Rue was the crown prince, the first person to defend the country. Rue still had a lot to learn. His path had just begun. Long Fei didn't know that Rui had taken the money. He was just using this to teach Rui a word, fight. Perhaps Rui didn't understand, but at least he knew and remembered this word. Rui repeated after Long Fei. Yes, fight. Long Fei immediately ordered for a brush, ink, paper, and inkstone, and wrote a large, fight word on the spot. Rui had already learned to read. Seeing the unfamiliar word, he came over and asked, Imperial Father, fight? Long Fei only nodded and didn't say anything else. Rui lay at the side, looking at the word seriously and memorizing it. It was all thanks to Gu Beiyue that he could learn to read at such a young age and develop such good habits. Perhaps the most precious thing Long Fei had given his son wasn't Cloud Realm, but Gu Beiyue. Although little Tang Tang could understand and speak many words, she hadn't even started learning to read yet. She hadn't received much education and had been raised by her grandmother and Auntie Ling for the first year of her life. All she did was play. After she turned a year old, she followed her mother for a few months, running to the mountains to plant flowers or staying by her parents' side to watch her father fiddle with hidden weapons and her mother work on the abacus. She looked at the big word written by her imperial uncle and began to read it in a low voice. Fight. Ning Jing hadn't found it strange when she saw Rui's early maturity. After all, Long Fei and Han Yunxi were his parents, so it was normal for him to grow up early. But now that Rui had learned to read before he was even a year old, Ning Jing was truly surprised to see Long Fei teach him like this. 3 years old looked like an adult. The teachings before 3 years old had a subtle influence, and it was the influence that was most easily overlooked. Tang Li spoiled his daughter to the heavens, protecting and doting on her. Ning Jing was a mother for the first time and had never seriously considered Tang Tang's upbringing. She couldn't count on Tang Li anymore. No matter if I'm in the Tang clan or wandering the outside world, no matter how bad my relationship with Tang Li becomes, my daughter's education will always come first. On the first day of the new year, under Tang Li's suggestion, everyone disguised themselves and brought their children to a nearby town to join in the fun. The two children had never seen such a lively scene before and were extremely excited. Since they were happy, the adults were naturally happy too. As for the empty red packets, Long Fei said to Han Yunxi, let it be. Let's see how those old man people react before we discuss it. Han Yunxi knew that she would have to face annoying things after returning to the palace. However, she still had a lot of fun these few days. On the 4th day of the new year, Long Fei was ready to set off for Yuning Palace. At the beginning of the country's founding, there was a pile of government affairs entangled with him. In addition, the disaster in Northern Li hadn't been alleviated yet, so he couldn't leave for too long. Brother, Ning Jing and I will stay for a few more days before looking for you, Tang Li said with a smile. Gu was on their roof. When he heard this, he rolled his eyes and didn't say anything. This tea house was his. What was the use of Tang Li asking about Long Fei? Long Fei personally tidied up a few urgent letters as he answered, you can ask Rui. This tea house belongs to him. Gu liked hearing this. He was happy and hung down from the eaves to look into the house. He saw Tang Li carrying little Tang Tang and running to Rui. He asked nicely, nephew, can Uncle Li and Aunt Jing stay here? Rui was folding paper. He ignored Tang Li and glanced at little Tang Tang before continuing with his work. Baby Rui, you guys go home first. Uncle Li will stay here, okay? Tang Li asked again. Rui turned around and still ignored Tang Li. He asked little Tang Tang seriously, Tang Tang, are you a mouse? Tang Tang. Mouse? Han Yunxi and Ning Jing looked over, puzzled. You're the mouse. Little Tang Tang was angry. Rue didn't argue with her. He wanted to yield to this little sister. He didn't understand why this little sister was so clingy. She was so clingy with the little thing, and the little thing also stayed in the Grand Tutor's arms every day. He hadn't seen her come down from her father's arms these past few days. Little Tang Tang didn't know what Rue was thinking. She was innocent. Her father liked to hug her and held her in his arms all day. She couldn't do anything about it. Rue couldn't be bothered with her anymore. When Tang Li asked a few more questions, Rue simply covered his ears. Looking at Tang Li's defeated expression, even Ning Jing wanted to laugh at him. Tang Li suddenly hoped that Long Fei Yi would have a daughter soon. He just so happened to have time to go to Jiangnan to find some good tea. Han Chen liked pre-Qingming tea, didn't he? He'd definitely find something better than Long Fei Yi. Gu left number 7 tea house first, followed by Long Fei Ye's group. The spring festival had ended early. When they returned to Yuning Palace, there were several big troubles waiting for Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi. Chapter 1237. By the time Han Yunxi's group returned to Yuning Palace, it was already the 6th day of the new year. They arrived at night, but Long Fei Yi didn't even have time to rest before heading to the imperial study. There were plenty of memorials to the emperor waiting for him to deal with. Han Yunxi and Rue had no idea when Long Fei Yi returned to his quarters. In any case, when mother and son woke up the next day, Long Fei Yi wasn't there. Han Yunxi had long gotten used to his busy schedule, so this wasn't even his busiest time. Even when they were in the same palace, she and Rue wouldn't see him for 2 to 3 days. Han Yunxi walked out the door and looked at the palace. She couldn't help but think of the time when she lived at the Duke of Qin's estate. Long Fei Yi had been busy back then as well, so she often went days without seeing him. Now that she'd finally seen him, he'd come looking for trouble with a cold face. Yuning Prefecture was the temporary capital city and the liveliest place in Cloud Realm Continent. The inner city was filled with nobles, civil and military officials, while the outer city was filled with commoners. The madams and young misses of the inner city organized all sorts of banquets to recite poems, compose poems, admire flowers, and write lyrics. Almost every banquet had amusing or scandalous news to spread and become the butt of jokes. If there were only 2 kinds of people who were invited to every banquet, one would be the most popular, and the other would be the least popular. Han Yunxi had been the least popular back in Tianning's capital city. Everyone wanted to see her make a fool of herself. Now she was the woman no one dared to invite. Since no one dared to invite her, she was happy to stay in the palace and play with her baby Rue. That was one of life's greatest joys. On Tang Li's first day in Yuning, he took Ning Jing and little Tang Tang to a temple fair in the outer city. Han Yunxi didn't go with them. She was waiting for the 10 old man's men to make trouble. She hadn't even returned to the palace when she confirmed that the 10 empty red envelopes had all been delivered to the old man's men. She even specifically asked a maidservant and a eunuch who handled this matter. The maidservant sent the red packets to Yuning Palace by Eagle. The eunuch took over and arranged for them to be distributed. When the servant girl counted the red packets, she noticed that there were 10 red packets without banknotes. When the eunuch went to each manor to distribute the red packets, he also noticed the 10 empty red packets. However, the 2 of them didn't dare to say anything. They all thought that the Empress did it on purpose. How could Han Yunxi blame them? Han Yunxi originally thought that as soon as she returned to the palace, the old man's people would come to her door. However, as the days passed, there was still no movement from this matter. However, they didn't take into account how many more booklets would come after these 2 booklets and how many people would covet the Tang sect. These 2 reports were enough for Long Fei to force Tang Zijin's hand. Tang Zijin was definitely still busy with the weapons at the Tang sect. Ning Jing had always been in charge of those weapons. Because they were second-hand modifications, there were many things that Tang Zijin didn't know about. It was very difficult for him to take over. As for the imperial capital, Tang Zijin had to personally oversee the construction of the imperial city. Without Tang Zijin, there was no progress in the construction of the imperial palace. It was difficult for Tang Zijin to do two things at the same time. He couldn't split himself up. Tang Li carefully read the two booklets and said, "Big brother, it's time to test my father." If Tang Zijin knew that Tang Li had said such a thing, he would probably be so angry that he wouldn't recognize him as his son. However, this was the truth. It was time to test Tang Zijin. Now, there were only two paths in front of Tang Zijin. The first was to compromise with Tang Li and Ning Jing. He would bring the couple back and have Ning Jing continue to be in charge of the weapons while he returned to the imperial capital as soon as possible. The second was to find someone else to take over the Tang sect's weapons. Tang Zijin naturally knew that many people in the imperial court were eyeing the lucrative job of weapons. The Tang sect had made many enemies because of this. If he was willing to give up the profits and find someone else to take over the weapons, the Tang sect would definitely attract many collaborators and allies. They might even become a major faction. In fact, if Tang Zijin extended an olive branch to the southern military, many of them would very likely cast Bailey Yuanlong aside and cooperate with the Tang sect. What choice would Tang Zijin make then? On one hand, he would accept Ning Jing and leave the Tang sect without descendants. On the other hand, he would accept foreign aid and form a faction. It had to be said that this was an extremely difficult choice for Tang Zijin. However, it was precisely such a difficult choice that could test Tang Zijin's sincerity. Ning Jing's expression turned serious. Tang Li, this heartless thing, was actually still smiling. Han Yunxi said, "Tang Li, whether you and Ning Jing return or not is the Tang sect's business. The weapons are an important matter for the imperial court. Now, it can be said that your family's business and the imperial court's business are mixed together. It's up to you to decide how to use these two booklets. I'll do what needs to be done." Tang Li didn't hesitate. He withdrew his smile and said seriously, "Sister-in-law, I also want to know if my father will become a second Bailey Yuanlong." Long Fei had been waiting for these exact words. He didn't deal with this matter publicly. Instead, he ordered someone to send the two memorials directly to the Tang sect for Tang Zijin to see. Tang Zijin was a smart man. He knew what to do as soon as he saw the memorials. Han Yunxi asked jokingly, "Tang Li, Ning Jing, if the birthday banquet is cancelled, will you still give Rui a gift?" "Of course. I've already prepared it. Tomorrow, we'll celebrate Rui's birthday ourselves." Tang Li smiled at Rui, who was flipping through a book. "Crown Prince, you'll definitely like tomorrow's gift." Rui glanced back and didn't react much before burying his head back into his book. He didn't understand, but he liked reading those words. Tomorrow's birthday banquet won't be cancelled. The banquet will go on as usual, and the gift will still be received. Han Yunxi said with a smile. "This is my son's first birthday. I want to make it a big deal. Let's see what those people can do to us." Tang Li and Ning Jing were shocked. Her Majesty the Empress was so willful. Was it really all right? If not for Gu Beiyue stopping him, Long Fei Yi would have found an excuse to wipe out the Shao clan after he became the emperor. It had to be said that the Shao clan's influence in the south was enormous and complex. A slight move in one part could affect the whole situation. Once Long Fei Yi took control of the Shao clan, the south would fall into chaos. Currently, the western, northern, eastern, and central regions were in a state of post-war reconstruction. Whether it was in terms of finances or food, most of the people had to come from the south. The south couldn't fall into chaos. The Southern Army had seized this opportunity to act so impudently. Of course, the Southern Army's supporters, the major clans behind the scenes, were all very smart. They knew that Long Fei Yi was slowly making plans for the South, so they had to take advantage of this opportunity to gain more power and allies for themselves. Xiao Dong was only a spokesperson chosen by the major clans of the South. He was very different from Bailey Yuanlong. However, the two of them had many common understandings. First, they both felt that Long Fei Yi had been too hasty in appointing Jin Zi, Chu Tianyin, and Luo Tu as commanders. Jin Zi and Chu Tianyin weren't even 30 yet, while Luo Tu was the nephew of Kangon private bank shopkeeper Luo. He had just turned 30 last year. According to Xiao Dong and Bailey Yuanlong, these three brats weren't even fully grown yet. What could they accomplish? Second, their spearhead was Han Yunxi. The Southern Army's ultimate goal was the position of Empress. The son of the Empress was the heir apparent. Thus, to put it more bluntly, they hoped that the Crown Prince, or even the future heir apparent, would be on their side and seek greater benefits for their clans. Bailey Yuanlong wanted nothing more than for the Southern Army to grow stronger and seize the position of Empress. In his opinion, as long as the Southern Army grew stronger, the Emperor would need him even more. He would have no choice but to rope him in. After all, from the looks of it, only the Bailey clan could contend with the Southern military faction. Bailey Yuanlong and Xiao Dong sat across from each other on the tea couch. They had been chatting for a long time, waiting for news from the palace. Although it was a private meeting, they were still courteous to each other. After all, they didn't treat each other with sincerity. They were both fighting for benefits, so they were both on guard against each other. After a long silence, Xiao Dong probed, "Sir Bailey, it's already so late. In my opinion, there shouldn't be any news from the palace, right?" What was he probing for? He wanted to know if Bailey Yuanlong had any informants in the palace with Long Fei Yi or Han Yunxi. All the civil and military officials of the imperial court wanted to bribe the people in the palace to find out some information. Unfortunately, it was very difficult because Long Fei Yi didn't have a harem. Only he and Han Yunxi lived in Yuning Palace, so they didn't need many servants. Xiao Dong pondered. Bailey Yuanlong was the former second-in-command of the East Qin camp, so he must be familiar with Long Fei Yi's trusted aides. Even if he couldn't bribe the people around the two masters, he should at least have some informants in the palace, right? As for whether Bailey Yuanlong had any informants in the palace, only he knew. Bailey Yuanlong replied, "Let's wait a bit longer. If there really isn't any news, then that's fine." Thus, the two fell into silence again. But after a while, Xiao Dong couldn't hold it in anymore. "Sir Bailey, if the Empress insists, then the two of us will have to advance and retreat together tomorrow." They had already agreed that if the birthday banquet wasn't cancelled tomorrow, they wouldn't mention it in the morning court. Instead, they would remonstrate and denounce the Empress in front of all the congratulatory guests. After all, it was the Empress who had said that it had to be a grand affair. Of course. Bailey Yuanlong nodded calmly. The two of them would definitely wait a bit longer. Unfortunately, it was almost dawn, but there was still no news of the banquet being cancelled. Since it was time to go to court, Xiao Dong couldn't stay any longer and got up to leave. After sending Xiao Dong off, Bailey Yuanlong sat down and drank a few mouthfuls of strong tea to sober himself up. At this time, a woman close to 30 walked out from behind a curtain. Although she was a bit old, she was born with a dignified beauty that could captivate even birds and beasts. She had the air of a lady from a noble family, enough to make people forget her age. This woman was none other than Bailey Mingxiang's eldest daughter, noble consort Xiao, who had been undercover in Northernly for many years. She'd risen from a small palace maid to become the favored consort of the Northern Dynasty's emperors, and Bailey Mingxiang's older sister. She'd hidden herself very deeply in Northernly for a very long time. Even when Northernly fell into civil strife, she didn't leave the Northern Dynasty's emperors. She'd followed them all the way to the north until she learned that the Northern Dynasty's emperors had committed suicide. She'd stolen many of the Northernly imperial family's treasures and knew the situation in Northernly like the back of her hand. She even had many trusted aides in Northernly. Bailey Yuanlong was a martial artist. When he'd followed Long Fei Yi in the past, he'd been as stubborn as a rock. But now, he'd managed to hook up with the southern generals precisely because of his daughter's help behind the scenes. Bailey Lixiang had toiled in Northern Li's palace for so many years. How could her shrewdness and methods be simple? The Bailey clan had sacrificed so much for the East Qin imperial family. In her eyes, Long Fei Yi should have at least made her father a prince and let her younger brother inherit the title in the future. That way, the Bailey clan would always enjoy the treatment of a prince. But not only did Long Fei Yi refuse, he even listened to Han Yunxi's words and divided the military power into 5. He even gave Han Yunxi the highest military power. The Bailey clan had followed Long Fei Yi the longest and sacrificed the most. Why shouldn't they enjoy special privileges? She and her father still couldn't accept that Long Fei Yi would give the Western military power to the Nether clans Chu Tianyin and the Black clans Jin Zi. In their eyes, this was a very risky and foolish move. It was digging one's own grave. Father, you should go rest. As I see it, this matter isn't so simple. It's best to be careful tomorrow. Bailey Lixiang was shrewd and cunning, but she was also a filial daughter. She didn't seek benefits for herself, but even if she had to die, she'd do it for her father and her brothers. The notion that a woman should sacrifice herself for her family was branded in her heart and would never be erased. How could Bailey Yuanlong be in the mood to rest? In front of Xiao Dong, he was calm and collected, but in front of his daughter, his anxiety was completely exposed. Lixiang, how can father sleep? Tomorrow, Xiao Dong and I will join forces to persuade her. What if? Father, there's no what if. As long as Han Yunxi dares to make a big deal of it, she won't be able to turn things around this time. I've not only convinced a few ministers, but also many commoners. Everything should be ready by now. As soon as the banquet starts, those commoners will definitely block the 4 city gates. Also, father, Han Yunxi was in the wrong in the first place. I don't believe the Northernly military will lock her up. Bailey Lixiang said seriously. Bailey Yuanlong nodded. His daughter's comforting words made him feel much more at ease. Father, do you remember when Han Yunxi used Tianning's Empress Dowager's birthday banquet to raise donations? Bailey Lixiang asked. Hearing this, Bailey Yuanlong grew nervous again. Could it be that this time she, father, don't worry. Daughter has already made preparations. Even if she raises donations, daughter can still deal with her. Bailey Lixiang's lips curved into a cold smile. In the candlelight, she truly looked like a viper. What method? Bailey Yuanlong asked hastily. Bailey Lixiang whispered something in his ear, causing Bailey Yuanlong to look surprised. Is there really such a thing? I've personally paid a visit to all 10 madams. It can't be faked. Bailey Lixiang replied in a low voice. Only then did Bailey Yuanlong relax. He had been very nervous before, but now he was looking forward to it. He couldn't wait for the birthday banquet to start as soon as possible. You should rest early too. It's your first meeting with the Emperor tomorrow, so you have to rest well, Bailey Yuanlong said seriously. I still have to go pick up my little sister later. She should be arriving in Yuning soon. Bailey Lixiang couldn't help but complain. That girl Mingxiang really doesn't know any better. Instead of thinking of a way to stay in Yuning, she ran off to become an army doctor. Chapter 1239. No one mentioned the Crown Prince's birthday banquet during the morning court session on the 9th. Some didn't dare to bring it up, while Bailey Yuanlong purposely didn't mention it. The focus of the morning court session was still on the northerly snowstorm, as well as the revision of the tax uniform. The impact of the tax system was widespread and involved the interests of all parties. Long Fei wasn't in a rush to change the rules, but simply tossed a rock onto the surface of the lake to test its depth. After the morning court session, Long Fei Yi returned to the imperial study as usual. The so-called morning court session was just the ministers bringing up the matters they wanted to report, the emperor bringing up the matters he wanted to do, and everyone discussed it. The real place to make decisions wasn't the Crepe Myrtle Hall, but the imperial study. As soon as Long Fei Yi arrived at the imperial study, a group of ministers followed him and asked for an audience. When Long Fei Yi returned to the imperial study, Han Yunxi and Rui had just woken up. Rui and Tang Tang got along very well on the way back from the number 7 tea house. Although Rui didn't pay much attention to others, the two could still stay in the same place and play on their own. After handing the children over to the servants, Han Yunxi and Ning Jing began their inspection. In order to prepare for the birthday banquet, Han Yunxi had been secretly busy for a few days. Last night, she and Ning Jing worked until very late before going to bed. Ever since she put on the Empress Phoenix coronet, she still hadn't put on the airs that an empress should have. Since the people below didn't like her so much, she naturally had to take this opportunity to show them that she, Han Yunxi, wasn't qualified to be the empress of the Great Qin. The birthday banquet was held in the Great Qian Hall on the west side of the imperial residence. Apart from the Crepe Myrtle Hall, the Great Qian Hall was the largest hall in the imperial residence. The hall was circular and open on all 4 sides. It could accommodate 100 people. When Han Yunxi and Ning Jing arrived at the Great Qian Hall, the servants had already set up the venue. The hall was circular, and the seats were arranged in a rectangular arrangement. The east side was the main seat, and behind the main seat was a large screen. On the left and right sides of the main seat were several separate secondary seats. Next to the secondary seats were rows of seats. There were 3 rows on the left and right, and each row could accommodate 10 people. Other than that, there were no other special decorations in the hall. Ning Jing deliberately counted and whispered, 7 secondary seats. What kind of rule is this? Most banquets were very particular about the seating arrangements, not to mention the Crown Prince's first birthday banquet. Those who could sit in the second seat had to be of high rank. Even some Junwang might not be able to sit on the secondary seat, let alone Guogong and Junwang. However, the situation in the Great Qin Empire was different. In the Great Qin Empire, only Gu held the title of Wang. He was Qin Wang Yu. The title of Junwang was vacant. As such, those who held the title of Wang appeared to have a much more noble status. The Great Qin Empire had 4 Guogong. They were Guogong Bailey Yuanlong, Guogong Qingshaoan, Guogong Shou Qi Chu, and Guogong Ding Kulin. Among them, apart from Bailey Yuanlong who held the position of military commander in the central region, the other 3 did not hold any positions in the imperial court. However, their influence was great. Shaoan was none other than Jiangnan Shao family's patriarch, Shao Dong's uncle. He had contributed a lot of provisions to the army in the central region. During the plague in Northernly, he had contributed the most provisions. Guogong Shou Qi Chu was originally a marquis of Western Zhou. Because he had led the soldiers and civilians to surrender, he was exempted from the battle in Western Zhou and was thus given the title of Wang. As for Guogong Ding Kulin, he was the owner of a large grassland in Northernly and controlled the best grassland in Northernly. During the chaos of the plague, he had voluntarily surrendered and saved the victims. As a result, he was given the title of Wang. The title of Wang wasn't given to a single person. It was a glory and status bestowed upon a family by the emperor. The matter of Wang was not only a reward based on merit, but it was also a form of appeasement, roping, and exploitation. For example, although Long Feiyi wanted to get rid of the Shao family, he had to give the title of Wang first. At the very least, he had to appease the Shao family and stabilize the Jiangnan region. According to the rules, the secondary seat below the main seat was given to those with titles. Thus, according to the Great Qin system of Wang, apart from Gu, the four Guogong all had the right to sit there. However, Bailey Yuanlong and the other dukedoms were arranged to sit behind the secondary seats. At this moment, Bailey Yuanlong and Shaoan were both staring at the 7 empty seats, their displeasure written all over their faces. Tang Clan Master, Madame Jing has arrived. Suddenly, a eunuch's loud voice rang out, causing everyone to fall silent. The Tang clan could be said to be a very special existence. The members of the Tang clan didn't have titles or official positions. Even if they controlled weapons, they didn't have military ranks. The status of being a member of the Tang clan was actually quite awkward. Moreover, when Long Feiyi paid respects to his ancestors, he didn't confer his mother the title of Empress Dowager. Consort Wan could only be considered Consort Dowager. The Tang clan was Consort Dowager's maternal family, so this status really didn't count for much. Chapter 1240. The Crown Prince came. The Prince of Yu, Gu Qishao, came too. For a moment, everyone looked outside the hall, very surprised. Everyone thought that the Crown Prince would come with the Emperor and Empress, who knew that he would come with Prince Yu first. This group of people was fighting for a position here, but when the Crown Prince and Prince Yu came, what Duke, what Imperial Uncle, all the positions were lowered. Tang Li's face was originally full of anger, but when he heard the announcement, he was immediately overjoyed and happy. In terms of poisonous tongue, he was absolutely poisonous to the people present, but his awkward status was not to be refuted. However, when Gu came, it was different. Gu was the only prince of Great Qin. He was the head of all the titles. Gu's identity was also brought out, and everyone present had to lower themselves. For the first time, Tang Li found that he could also like Gu so much. Before the Crown Prince and Prince Yu came in, everyone had already stood up. When the Crown Prince and Prince Yu came in, everyone knelt down. This was the etiquette of this place, and Tang Li and Ning Jing were no exception. Long live His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. Long live His Royal Highness Prince Yu. Gu was wearing a brand new red robe, which was specially inlaid with gold. He wore a lot of gold ornaments, even his hairpin was gold. Red and gold together, it was as tacky as it could be. However, he was able to wear these two colors with a sense of gold and luxury. He was as showy as he could be. This was specially ordered for Rue's first birthday banquet. He did not care about Northernly, anyway, it was his godson's birthday, so he must make the place as big as possible, the bigger the better, it must be lively. In fact, he could have arrived in Yuning last night, but because of this set of clothes, he was delayed for a night. Little Rui was sitting on Gu's right shoulder. He was wearing the purple robe his mother had specially prepared for him, looking extremely noble. Although he was young and had an immature appearance, he sat high above on Gu's shoulder and looked down at the people kneeling on the ground. He did not show any fear. Instead, his cold and lonely face was filled with a heroic spirit that made people not dare to look directly at him. Everyone remained kneeling as they waited for their masters to tell them to rise, but little Rui didn't say a word. Meanwhile, Gu Qishao simply treated everyone as heir. All of their attention was on Tang Li's family of 3. Gu carried Rui through the kneeling crowd and stood in front of Tang Li. He squatted down and asked suspiciously, "Tang Li, what are you doing?" Tang Li looked up and said seriously, "Salute." He. Gu Qishao placed little Rui in the main seat, then picked up little Tang to sit on one side. At first, everyone was chatting in small groups, but once Gu and Rui arrived, they couldn't speak carelessly. Gu Qishao never cared who was present. He carried Rui and little Tang over and had them sit on his left and right thighs, chuckling as he teased them. Now that Tang Li was the imperial uncle, he suddenly felt lonely at the top. With no one to provoke him, he was bored, so he brought over grapes and peeled them one by one, giving them to Ning Jing to eat. All the civil and military officials in the court looked at them quietly, no one daring to make a sound. If the crown prince was older, they could still flatter him. But he was only 1 year old. What could they flatter him for? They could only tease him. Who would dare? As for Tang Li, he just clashed with Bailey Yuanlong and the Shao clan. Anyone who bumped into him now might end up as a punching bag. As for Gu, even Bailey Yuanlong and clan head Shao didn't dare speak to him. As a result, everyone could only wait and wait. There was still an hour before the banquet began. Finally, someone came to save everyone. This person was none other than the Grand Tutor and head of the Imperial Physician Courtyard, Gu Beiyue. Grand Tutor Gu has arrived. Upon hearing the eunuch's announcement, Rui immediately jumped down from Gu's lap and rushed out as fast as he could. Soon, everyone saw Gu Beiyue walk in. He was still the same, wearing snow-white robes and a calm and gentle expression. He was clearly a warm person, like the spring breeze in April, but after looking at him for a long time, he was like the lonely moon in the late autumn sky, high and far, unreachable. Rui hung on Gu Beiyue's back, rubbing his neck intimately. Bailey Yuanlong was convinced of Gu Beiyue's strength even though he was a descendant of the Shadow clan. As for clan head Shaoan, who had opposed him in Medical City, he was not only convinced, but also fearful. The two of them often thought how good it would be if Gu Beiyue wasn't a descendant of the Shadow clan and wasn't Han Yunxi's subordinate. When Gu Beiyue arrived, the tense atmosphere disappeared. Most people stood up and bowed to Gu Beiyue. Gu Beiyue also politely returned the greeting. The Grand Tutor's rank wasn't high. Gu Beiyue bowed to those of a higher rank than him, and he was also very respectful to the 4 Guadukes. The 4 Guadukes all stood up and responded politely. Gu Beiyue had just arrived and hadn't rested for a day and night. As soon as he arrived, he heard that Gu and Rui had arrived first. He didn't even have time to see Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi. He didn't even have time to rest and changed his clothes before coming over. Gu and Tang Li were people who didn't mind making things worse. Moreover, Rui was such a young child. How could he not worry? Chapter 1241. As soon as they saw Gu Beiyue arrive, both Gu and Tang Li were delighted and rose to their feet to welcome him. Gu Beiyue was a smart man, so his lips curved into a smile at the sight of the 7 secondary seats. He knew exactly what was going on. Although his official rank wasn't low, he still carried Rui on his back and openly sat down by Gu's side. The position of Grand Tutor was a unique one. In different countries and dynasties, their statuses and responsibilities differed. Some Grand Tutors were equivalent to the Prime Minister of a country. As the teacher of the Emperor, they could even manage the court in his place when the Emperor was young. Some Grand Tutors simply taught the Crown Prince to read and understand, but weren't allowed to involve themselves in court matters. Still others had no real power and were nothing more than an empty title. For example, Tianning's Crown Prince Long Tianma's position of Grand Tutor was held by Tianning's Prime Minister. In truth, the Prime Minister didn't specifically assist the Crown Prince, but only occasionally gave him advice. The Grand Tutor of the Great Qin Empire was a fourth-rank official. Gu Beiyue not only taught the Crown Prince to read and understand, but was also allowed to teach him about politics. If Long Feiyi promoted the Grand Tutor to a first-rank official position, heaven knows how busy Gu Beiyue would be. Would he be able to escape unscathed from the various factions in court? As a fourth-rank official, Gu Beiyue didn't have any real power. He could easily refuse anyone's attempts to form a clique and extricate himself from the complicated struggles between factions. From an outsider's standpoint, he could evaluate the high officials more objectively. He didn't have any real power, but his words to the emperor now and the crown prince in the future carried a lot of weight. It was said that the words of a lowly man carried little weight, but Long Feiyi did the exact opposite. He used this method of low position, little power, heavy words, to protect Gu Beiyue from being dragged down by the various factions. It also ensured that Gu Beiyue's advice to him and the crown prince would be more objective and impartial. Once the crown prince grew up, Gu Beiyue would be assisting Long Fei in teaching him how to judge court affairs. He'd have to judge everything from national policies to memorials. Gu Beiyue's standpoint and position would be crucial. Gu Beiyue was a fourth-rank official, but his position as the crown prince's teacher was special. No one present dared to express dissatisfaction with him sitting in the second seat. When he saw Rue hugging Gu Beiyue without letting go, Gu was filled with envy and jealousy. While Rue wasn't paying attention, he suddenly carried Rue down and let him sit in the main seat again. Rue immediately glared at him fiercely. That gaze was exactly the same as the one Long Feiyi used to glare at Gu. Gu Beiyue narrowed his eyes and looked over disdainfully, just like how he looked at Long Feiyi. Gu Qishao and Rue glared at each other until they were at odds. However, Gu Beiyue was shocked. He quickly carried Rue back and whispered, Rue, you can't sit in the main seat in front of outsiders. It's a big taboo. Fortunately, the banquet hadn't started and Rue was still too young. No one present noticed this. Rue looked up and asked softly, why? You'll understand when you have brothers in the future, Gu Beiyue replied softly. Just remember it. Grand Tutor will explain it to you in the future. Okay. Rue was always so obedient in front of Grand Tutor. Gu Beiyue carried Rue to the first seat below the main seat. He half knelt in front of Rue and said softly, sit properly, Rue. Rue, remember, the seat on your father's right is yours. No matter what happens, unless your father agrees, you can't change your seat. Rue nodded and asked again, why? Grand Tutor, where do you sit? Grand Tutor will tell you when you're older. Gu Beiyue thought for a moment and stretched out his pinky with his back to the crowd. Rue, Grand Tutor will promise you that as long as you don't change your seat, Grand Tutor will always sit behind you. I won't change my seat either, okay? Rue didn't hesitate to hook his pinky finger with Gu Beiyue's for a pinky promise. He said, I want to make a promise with father too. Gu Beiyue smiled and almost reached out to rub Rue's head. However, he didn't. He retreated to his seat and sat down properly. At this time, Shaoan retracted his gaze. He originally wanted to let the crown prince sit in the main seat for a while before making trouble. Who knew that Gu Beiyue would come at such a coincidence? In this kind of situation, the crown prince sitting in the main seat could be a big or small matter. If it was a small matter, it would be a child being immature. If it was a big matter, it would be the Empress and Grand Tutor's fault. Although Xiao Dong and Bailey Yuanlong were prepared to impeach Han Yunxi, Xiaoan had a bad feeling about today's situation. He didn't know what Bailey Yuanlong meant when he kept winking at him just now. He pondered that he would have to remain indecisive and act according to the wind. The Crown Prince and Grand Tutor each took one seat. In addition to Gu, Tang Li, and Ning Jing, there were only 2 seats left. Little Tang Tang was different from Rui. She was held in Tang Li's arms and didn't have a seat to herself. After Gu Beiyue took his seat, many officials started chatting with him. Everyone had endless things to say to Gu Beiyue. It wasn't that they had topics to talk about with Gu Beiyue, but that they had many questions to ask Gu Beiyue. Chatting was two-sided, while asking for advice was one-sided. In terms of real chatting, only Long Feiyi and Han Yunxi had enough brainpower to chat with Gu Beiyue. Not very well. She's still recuperating in Jiangnan. Time is too tight, and I can't bear to see her rushing about, Gu Beiyue replied indifferently. Is there anything wrong? Ning Jing was a little puzzled. She had been pregnant before, so she knew a lot about the situation. Gu Beiyue and Qin Min were both doctors. How could they not be able to deal with a small pregnancy reaction? It's nothing serious. She's just afraid of the cold. Gu Beiyue quickly changed the topic and chatted with the ministers below. The 4 Guogong, several first-rank officials, and generals were all very quiet. No one took the initiative to chat with Gu Beiyue. They were all trying to figure out who would take the remaining 2 seats. No matter how they thought about it, there were no imperial relatives in the imperial family, and no one in the imperial court was qualified to take a seat. These seats weren't randomly placed. No one could figure out the emperor's intentions. Many people even guessed that the emperor might confer 2 Junwang titles during the crown prince's birthday banquet. Finally, the eunuch outside the door shouted again. This time, the main characters had arrived. Your Majesty, Her Imperial Highness the Empress has arrived. Everyone stood up nervously and walked out of their seats to kneel in greeting. Long Feiyi and Han Yunxi both wore purple luxurious clothes. Even in this kind of occasion, Long Feiyi didn't forget to hold Han Yunxi's hand and intertwine their fingers. After the 2 of them took their seats, Long Feiyi said, My beloved subjects, rise and take your seats. Everyone stood up and took their seats. The hall became even quieter. Everyone was waiting for Long Feiyi to ask the eunuch at the side if everyone had arrived. However, Long Feiyi didn't ask. He left the 2 secondary seats empty and turned to ask eunuchly, prepare to start the banquet. We think everyone should be hungry. Yes. Eunuch Li respectfully retreated. Not long after, 2 groups of palace maids filed out from the left and right sides of the main hall. Each of the palace maids held a tray of food. On the tray were very exquisite porcelain dishes. The dishes were covered and the dishes couldn't be seen. However, just by looking at these dishes, it was enough to see how sumptuous today's banquet was. At this time, the Bailey father and daughter sneered. They couldn't wait for today's banquet to be more sumptuous. Bailey Lixiang's title of first-rank madam was another special treatment the imperial family had bestowed upon the Bailey clan. A first-rank madam was the highest rank among the titled madams, so they received the best treatment. Madams of the first rank were usually the mothers or wives of high-ranking officials. Bailey Lixiang was the noble consort of the Northern Dynasty's emperors, so she couldn't accept such a title at all. Long Feiyi could make her a princess or give her a large reward, but Long Feiyi had made an exception to show his special treatment of the Bailey clan. When the country was first founded, the south was strong while the north and west were filled with all sorts of unstable elements. Long Feiyi could use his power, military might, and iron-blooded policies to suppress them. But Cloud Realm continent still needed at least 3 more years to settle down before they could start rebuilding. The commoners would need at least 5 or 6 years to live a peaceful life. It'd take at least 10 or 20 years for them to prosper and prosper. Long Fei Yi didn't want to waste any more time. It wasn't just his time, but the people of Cloud Realm continent. He'd spent countless days deliberating before bestowing the titles of Duke and Prime Minister. More than that, he'd spent countless nights talking with Gu Beiyue and a few of his trusted aides. In the end, they decided to wrong the Bailey clan and choose 4 clan heads from the south, west, and north to share the title of Guogong with Bailey Yuanlong. This way, the Bailey clan wouldn't be given too high of a title or salary, but would be able to highlight the status of the other 3 clans. At the very least, the other 3 clans would accept it wholeheartedly. Long Fei Yi didn't tell Bailey Yuanlong the reason, because he'd wronged the Bailey clan while giving the man a test. After all, the man had disappointed him before. The result was regrettable. Even now, Bailey Yuanlong still didn't understand the special treatment he and Han Yunxi were giving him. He even colluded with the southern generals. Han Yunxi recovered from her thoughts with a smile on her face. Her gaze rested on Bailey Lixiang. That's Lixiang, right? Bailey Lixiang quickly rose to her feet. This subject's daughter, Bailey Lixiang, greets esteemed Empress. Han Yunxi sized her up. She'd never seen Bailey Lixiang before, so today was the first time. It had to be said that Bailey Lixiang was much more beautiful than Bailey Mingxiang. Even at her age, she was still beautiful. But Han Yunxi could tell at a glance the difference between her and Bailey Mingxiang. Bailey Lixiang didn't have the kindness of Bailey Mingxiang, but lacked the ruthlessness of Bailey Mingxiang. Han Yunxi had seen Bailey Yuanlong's temper and brain many times. She'd always discussed with Long Fei Yi how he'd become a completely different person in the past year. Why was he so much calmer and shrewder than before? Moreover, his collusion with the Southern Army was done in a rather secretive manner. They still couldn't find anything to use against him. All of this had happened after Bailey Lixiang's return. How could Han Yunxi not suspect her? Lixiang, you're very knowledgeable. You should have seen banquets even bigger than this one. Tell me, this banquet held for the Crown Prince's first birthday isn't a disgrace to him, is it? Han Yunxi said with a smile. Bailey Lixiang was indeed very knowledgeable. She'd wanted to wait a bit, but since Han Yunxi had given her the chance, she didn't mind explaining to everyone how much Han Yunxi had spent on today's banquet. So far, Han Yunxi's biggest expenditure had been on the tableware in front of everyone. Yes, this subject obeys. Bailey Mingxiang nodded and said seriously, the banquet today looked simple, but there was a lot of thought put into it. It's clear to see esteemed Empress's intentions. This subject will talk about the tableware. Han Yunxi smiled and indicated for Bailey Lixiang to continue. The tableware used by His Majesty and esteemed Empress is the rarely seen glittering jewel rainbow dragon and phoenix porcelain. The entire set is divided into dragon and phoenix porcelain, with 69 pieces each, Bailey Lixiang said loudly. As soon as these words were spoken, many people present revealed looks of shock. Glittering jewel rainbow dragon and phoenix porcelain. They'd all heard of the name before, but almost no one had seen the real thing. So these 2 treasures were in the imperial family. Guogong Shaoan gave Bailey Lixiang a look of admiration. He'd had his suspicions when he saw the Emperor and Empress's tableware, but the tableware hadn't been fully arranged yet. There were only about 10 pieces, so he couldn't be sure. As expected, Bailey Lixiang's knowledge and eyesight were excellent. Han Yunxi clapped her hands happily. It's rare to see someone who can tell, hee. Although everyone was shocked, it was only shock. After all, the Emperor and Empress had the right to enjoy tableware of this standard. But Han Yunxi's next words immediately displeased everyone. Han Yunxi said, "Today, we'll let everyone bask in the Crown Prince's glory and broaden their horizons. Later, the entire set of glittering jewel rainbow porcelain will be displayed. The entire set of glittering jewel rainbow dragon and phoenix porcelain would be displayed." That meant 69 tableware of all sizes, bowls, plates, pots, spoons, chopsticks, plates, spoons, and so on. Everything would be used. Looking at it this way, how many types of delicacies would there be tonight? In Northernly, the soldiers were starving as they sent disaster relief. The herdsmen were starving as they sought refuge from the cold. Han Yunxi, as the empress, actually spent so much money on a single meal. Everyone looked at each other in dismay. Some of the more upright people had already started discussing. Ever since he met Han Yunxi, he was no longer the previous master of the Bailey clan, right? Apart from Bailey Yuanlong's group, some of the ministers in the back looked at each other worriedly. They respected the empress very much and were full of expectations. However, today's banquet had greatly disappointed them. The Crown Prince's first birthday banquet was indeed a major event and couldn't be shameful. But these were special times, so the empress had to restrain herself a little. Of course, everyone kept their worries to themselves. No one dared to speak up. After all, the emperor had only said one sentence so far. No one could tell what he thought of the empress's actions. Moreover, the banquet had only just begun. The dishes hadn't even been served yet. Even if they wanted to persuade the empress, they had to have sufficient reasons to convince the emperor. Apart from Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi's confidants, the hundreds of people in the large hall were growing more and more dissatisfied with Han Yunxi. Han Yunxi ignored everyone else, her attention on Bailey Lixiang. She was growing more and more satisfied with her. She chuckled. It's rare to meet someone who knows what's good for them. Madam Lixiang, take this set meal as a reward from the Crown Prince. Bailey Lixiang hastily walked out of her seat and bowed in thanks. After Bailey Lixiang returned to her seat, the hall fell silent again. Only the palace maids continued to dance gracefully as they served the dishes. Every dish was covered and steaming hot. The aroma was enough to make anyone drool. The weather was cold, and according to the rules of the banquet, every dish had to be covered. Thus, no one suspected anything. It was already mealtime, so many people were hungry. Unfortunately, Long Fei Yi still hadn't touched his chopsticks, so everyone could only keep him company on an empty stomach. Long Fei Yi sat high up in his seat. He was less dignified than he usually was in court, but the domineering air between his brows and the noble air of a king didn't diminish in the slightest. He didn't pay much attention to the people below. Even when Bailey Lixiang explained the origin of the tableware, his doting gaze was focused on Han Yunxi. It was as if he knew Han Yunxi was fooling around, and that everyone was dissatisfied with the empress. But he was happy to let her do as she pleased. After Bailey Lixiang sat down, she couldn't help but look at Long Fei Yi again. She'd heard all sorts of things about this master since childhood, but now she finally got the chance to meet him. He was handsome, domineering, noble, and aloof. Just like any other woman who'd seen him, she'd be instantly moved. But she knew very well that she'd missed her chance more than 20 years ago. She could only blame her younger sister, Bailey Mingxiang, in her heart. After Bailey Mingxiang entered the Duke of Qin's estate as a servant, she'd had so many chances. Why didn't she seize them? Otherwise, there would have been an imperial noble concubine by this man's side today. Her Bailey clan would have gained another bargaining chip. After a long silence, everyone began to count the dishes in front of them. There were still so many dishes left to be served. His Majesty wouldn't wait until all the dishes were served before starting the banquet, would he? Gu and Gu Beiyu had rushed over today, so they had no idea what Han Yunxi and Long Feiyi were planning. Although Gu often ruined Long Feiyi's plans, this banquet was Rue's, so he naturally kept his mouth shut. He sat with his arms crossed, carefully sniffing the table full of fragrances, as if he'd discovered something. But Gu Beiyu didn't seem interested in the food on the table. He stood up and broke the silence. This official has prepared a meager gift for His Highness the Crown Prince. I hope His Highness will kindly accept it. There were two ways to give gifts at birthday banquets. One was to give them before they entered the banquet, while the other was to present them. Giving gifts was the rule of ordinary households. Present gifts was the etiquette of the imperial family. Of the nearly 100 people present, those of low status had already handed over their birthday gifts to the eunuchs as soon as they'd entered the palace. As for those with high statuses, they would present gifts in front of everyone at the banquet. Generally speaking, the gifts would begin after the banquet had begun and after 3 rounds of wine. Since Gu Beiyu had started it and everyone was hungry, no one fussed over etiquette with Gu Beiyu. After all, there weren't many people who needed to present gifts in court. Perhaps His Majesty would start eating after the gifts were presented. Everyone was looking forward to seeing what Gu Beiyu's Grand Tutor would give His Highness the Crown Prince for his birthday. Gu Beiyu had someone deliver the gift, but it was none other than a giant map. He and his servants unfurled it and showed it to the Emperor, Empress, and Crown Prince, as well as the various officials. The map was even taller than him and 2 meters wide. It was a map of Cloud Realm continent. Your Highness Crown Prince, this official spent 3 months drawing this map with my own hands. It includes every county and town in Cloud Realm continent. Places prone to floods, droughts, fires, snowstorms, and other rare disasters have all been marked out. Gu Beiyu paused before sighing. This year, the Great Qin's north has been plagued by disasters. Famine, plague, and snowstorms have alternated, leaving the people in dire straits. Your Highness is 1 year old today, so this official presents this gift to the victims of the north and the people of Great Qin. May the imperial family take pity on our Great Qin and wish for no more disasters. Rue didn't understand, but he'd long been captivated by the map. Of course, he had to be straightforward. As a result, Duke Qingshaoan also stood up and presented a small gift. He spoke of the country's righteousness and concern for its people, similar to Bailey Yuanlong's. While expressing her worries, she also mocked Han Yunxi. The other 2 dukes also presented their gifts, but they weren't small or large. They didn't mock the Empress, nor did they have any hidden meanings in their words. Instead, they congratulated her according to the rules. After the 4 dukes, it was time for the first-rank officials. Only 2 of these first-rank officials presented their gifts according to the rules. The rest followed Bailey Yuanlong's example and denounced the Empress with sarcasm. Han Yunxi sat motionless with an expressionless face. Seeing her sullen appearance, Bailey Yuanlong finally felt the pent-up frustration in his heart dissipate. Xiao An's lips curled into a cold smile. He never cared whether Long Feiyi was forced to slap the Empress's face for the sake of the big picture, or whether he really couldn't stand the Empress's first birthday banquet. He only knew that once there was an opening, it wouldn't be difficult to follow. If there was a first time, there would definitely be a second and third time. After the gifts were presented, Han Yunxi's face was still sullen. She swept a glance at the table and reminded him unhappily, "Your Majesty, the dishes have all been served. Please eat." The dishes today were all personally prepared by Qinxie. Bailey Yuanlong was about to stand up when Bailey Lixiang pulled him back. Bailey Lixiang was still very cautious. Long Fei Yi nodded, and Han Yunxi ordered the court ladies on the side to serve them. Under everyone's gaze, the court ladies respectfully opened the largest porcelain pot on Long Fei Ye's table. As soon as the lid was lifted, steam wafted out, accompanied by a sweet fragrance. This was a smell Long Fei Yi was very familiar with, the smell of old hen soup. The court ladies carefully filled a bowl and placed it in front of Long Fei Yi before withdrawing. Your Majesty, this is a whole chicken soup made from 3-year-old hens, mixed with 100-year-old snow ginseng and many other precious herbs. It's been simmering since this morning. This soup contains the essence of both chicken and herbs. For this dish, you only drink the soup and don't eat the meat. Han Yunxi introduced seriously, her mood much better. Long Fei Yi looked down at the chicken soup in front of him with furrowed brows. He didn't move for a long time, as if thinking about something. Everyone sighed in their hearts. A small pot of soup used a chicken and a lot of expensive herbs. Just this dish alone used more than 100 old hens. How much food would they consume if they were to finish the entire meal today? How much silver? Everyone couldn't help but look at the steaming pot of soup in front of their tables. They really wanted to take a look. But His Highness hadn't moved yet, so they couldn't move. At this moment, Bailey Li Xiang gave the latter's servant a look, then gave her father a light kick. It was finally time to make a move. It wasn't a big deal to dislike the gifts for being too small. However, such extravagance and waste was solid evidence that everyone could see for themselves. Han Yunxi, even if His Majesty wants to protect you this time, he might not be able to. Bailey Yuanlong immediately stood up, walked out of his seat, and knelt down on both knees. In an instant, the entire hall fell into a deathly silence. Bailey Yuanlong, what are you doing? Long Fei Yi spoke up. This old subject asks Your Majesty, Empress, and His Highness the Crown Prince to forgive this old subject. Bailey Yuanlong said loudly. What crime have you committed? Long Fei Yi asked again. Today is the Crown Prince's first birthday, so it should be lively and festive. Esteemed Empress is holding a birthday banquet for the Crown Prince and inviting important officials for a joyous occasion. However, the commoners in the north haven't been able to eat their fill, and the soldiers who came to relieve the disaster are also starving. This old subject's heart is bitter, unable to enjoy such a feast. This old subject earnestly asks Your Majesty to allow this old subject to withdraw. Leave. Everyone knew that official Bailey was going to denounce the Empress, but they didn't expect that he wouldn't be as fierce and direct as before. Instead, he was begging the Emperor to allow him to leave to express his anger. This wasn't just expressing his anger, but also throwing the difficult problem to the Emperor. To put it more bluntly, he was threatening the Emperor. He was threatening the Emperor to make a choice on the spot, accept the Empress' extravagance and waste and ignore the disaster victims, or accept his advice. If the Emperor allowed him to withdraw, then he would be condoning the Empress's absurd actions in front of everyone. The Emperor would definitely be implicated and lose the hearts of his subjects. If the Emperor didn't allow him to withdraw, then he would definitely argue with reason and force the Emperor to punish the Empress in order to appease the hearts of his subjects. Han Yunxi sat quietly in the silence. Long Fei Yi was also very quiet as he looked at Bailey Yuanlong. Your Majesty, please allow this old subject to withdraw. Bailey Yuanlong said again. This time, several officials from the Bailey camp all stood up and knelt with Bailey Yuanlong, saying in unison, Your Majesty, this subject is worried about the disaster victims in the north and has no heart to enjoy today's feast. We earnestly ask Your Majesty to allow this subject to withdraw. Long Fei Ye's brows furrowed at this. To the side, Gu narrowed his eyes. He hadn't taken the Bailey clan seriously before, but today was the first time he had seriously slapped Bailey Yuanlong's face. Chapter 1245. As soon as Han Yunshi cried out, Rue, who didn't understand, immediately followed suit. Imperial father, imperial mother is innocent. Han Yunshi almost laughed out loud. This son really was her biological son. How are you innocent? Long Fei Yi asked. Your Majesty, this concubine doesn't know if this concubine is fit to be empress or the crown prince's mother. However, this concubine is organizing the crown prince's birthday banquet without any extravagance or wastage or neglect the disaster victims. Before Han Yunshi could finish, Bailey Yuanlong angrily interrupted, Your Majesty, everyone will have a table full of delicacies for today's banquet. One person's meal can fill 10 people's stomachs. If this isn't extravagance and wastage, then what is? There are commoners and soldiers in the north who can't return to their homes. It's not easy for them to even have a full meal. Your entire pot of chicken soup only consumes a few mouthfuls of soup. This really isn't wastage. This is a reckless waste of natural resources. Han Yunshi looked at Bailey Yuanlong and asked coldly, Is there anything else? Bailey Yuanlong sneered, Your Majesty, today's banquet is extraordinary. Could it be that Your Majesty doesn't think it's a waste? Just as everyone was surprised that Han Yunshi would argue, Han Yunshi actually admitted it loudly. Official Bailey is extremely right. There's a natural disaster in the north. This concubine's grand banquet is a grave mistake, a grave mistake. For a moment, everyone was stunned, thinking that they had misheard. Under the silent gazes of the crowd, Han Yunshi stood up with Rue, and walked to Long Fei Yi. Zhao Mama and Mu Ling, who had been hiding at the side, finally showed themselves. They walked out from the left and right and stood on either side of Han Yunshi and Rue, Mu Ling personally opened the lids of all the cutlery on Long Fei Yi's table. The kneeling people couldn't see the contents of the pots and bowls, so they didn't know what was going on. With a smile on her face, Mu Ling and Granny Zhao brought the pots and bowls down one by one for the officials to see. She saw that the pots and bowls were all filled with clear soup with spices. Not to mention fish, she couldn't even find a single tea leaf. For a moment, everyone, whether they were kneeling or sitting, was stupefied. Bailey Yuanlong and Bailey Lixiang were dumbstruck, as if someone had sealed their acupoints. They couldn't even move their eyes. As for the members of the Shao clan, their expressions were extremely ugly. Who would have thought that a table full of hot and fragrant food would turn out to be like this? Han Yunshi was clearly toying with them on purpose. Was Han Yunshi playing with them on purpose? It could only be said that these people were too full of themselves. Han Yunshi didn't have that much time on her hands. She was just using this opportunity to give some people a final warning. Bailey Yuanlong and Shaoan couldn't believe that the emperor and empress would let it go so easily. Bailey Lixiang suddenly remembered something and quickly shot a glance at a young eunuch on the side. The eunuch nodded and hurriedly retreated. However, as soon as he reached the door, he was stopped by Su Donglin. Where are you in such a hurry to go? Su Donglin asked. This servant is going to relieve myself. The eunuch's teeth were trembling. This young master just happens to be going as well. Let's go together, Su Donglin said. The eunuch's panic was written all over his face. He timidly followed Su Donglin to the outhouse before returning. Is there anything else? Su Donglin asked. Nothing else. The eunuch shook his head. Then go back and wait on her. Esteemed Empress has already given the order. Anyone who dares to run away in the middle of the banquet will be guilty of a great crime. Su Donglin warned coldly. The eunuch scrambled back to his seat. It took time for news of the imperial palace to spread to the outside world, and it required many people to spread it by word of mouth. The extravagance and waste of this birthday banquet had already been revealed. But the troublemakers outside the palace had no idea. The eunuch had just helped Bailey Lixiang spread the news, which had already reached the scholars who were causing trouble. Heaven knows what kind of mess they'd make. The eunuch wanted to give Bailey Lixiang a look when he entered the hall, but she didn't look back. Meanwhile, the banquet hall was silent. The crown prince was about to begin his task. The wide table was filled with all sorts of things, 66 in total. There were seals, books, brushes, ink, paper, inkstone, abacus, coins, account books, food, toys, and so on. Rue was standing in front of the table, looking at the items. Everyone knew that the crown prince was precocious. Even if he wasn't, the empress would have trained him to only grab the seals. Thus, no one cared about what the crown prince would grab. Everyone was still thinking about what had happened just now. Those who wanted to protect themselves were all speculating on how the emperor would deal with them. Meanwhile, Bailey Yuanlong's and Xiao En's factions were still panicking, trying to guess what Han Yunxi was planning. It was just a banquet to begin with, but everyone had been tormented until they were hungry and terrified. They were both physically and mentally exhausted. However, Han Yunxi, Long Feiyi, and Gu were all looking at Rue expectantly. Han Yunxi hadn't told Rue what to grab, but Long Feiyi had told Rue to grab whatever he liked. If Rue didn't like the seals and didn't want to inherit the throne in the future, he'd let Rue do as he pleased. In any case, Han Yunxi was still young. She could always give Rue more brothers. Everyone was looking forward to it because they didn't know what Rue would grab, and secondly, Han Yunxi and Long Feiyi had made a bet, Gu and Gu Beiyue had made a bet, and Tang Li and Ning Jing had made a bet as well. If all the civil and military officials in the hall were to know that their masters were actually in the mood to make a bet, how would they feel? What would Rue grab? Chapter 1246. What would Rue grab? Han Yunxi bet that Rue would grab the antidote needle, while Long Feiyi bet that Rue would grab the sword. The loser would have to eat the noodles cooked by the winner. Gu Beiyue bet that Rue would grab the seal, while Gu bet that Rue would grab the abacus. The loser would have to be the winner's servant for a day. Tang Li bet that Rue would grab the scriptures, while Ning Jing bet that Rue would grab the coins. The winner would be in charge of the finances. How would Rue know that he was shouldering 3 wins and losses? He stood there for a long time, pondering seriously. It was really difficult to face so many choices. In fact, there were many things he wanted. But he could only have one. He grabbed his fingers, feeling more and more conflicted. The longer Rue hesitated, the longer the ministers panicked. The gifts had been presented and the banquet was over. The banquet should be over after the drawing of lots, right? Almost 80% of the people in the hall were hoping for the banquet to end quickly. Because as long as it ended, they could no longer believe that the Empress was kind enough to not pursue their responsibility for slander. They could no longer believe that the Emperor was in a good mood today and would not pursue their crime of protecting themselves. Finally, Rue reached out his hand. This time, the anxious people finally breathed a sigh of relief, as if they could see the hope of the banquet ending. On the other hand, Han Yunxi and Long Feiyi were nervous. The outcome was about to be decided. The hall was silent as everyone's eyes were fixed on Rue. Rue's hand reached out for the seal and grabbed it. At this moment, Gu Beiyue showed an extremely gratified smile. Gu's mood fell to the bottom. Han Yunxi and Long Feiyi, Tang Li and Ning Jing were not willing to lose or win. As expected of the crown prince. Heaven's will. Heaven's will cannot be disobeyed. Long Fei Yi said loudly, Rui, come here. Although Zhou Zhao had foreshadowed it, Long Fei Yi and the others did not believe it. If Rui grabbed the seal, would the officials believe that the crown prince would be the emperor in the future? Would they all submit? This was a naive thought. Long Fei Yi carried Rui up and let him sit beside him. This action of his was much more significant than grabbing the seal. He was telling everyone how much he expected of Rui and how much he doted on him. It was a taboo for the crown prince to take the initiative to sit on the main seat. However, Long Fei Yi, the emperor, personally carried the crown prince up. That was the highest level of favor. The officials were all shocked when they saw this. They also knew that the emperor was doing this for everyone to see. Now that the things used to catch Zhou Yu were taken back, everyone's anxious heart finally calmed down a little. Before this, there were rumors that esteemed Empress was going to hold a banquet for His Highness the Crown Prince, but the commoners must have misunderstood the esteemed Empress. As the saying goes, the ignorant are not guilty. The commoners didn't do it on purpose, so please don't let this disturb His Majesty and esteemed Empress' mood. Han Yunqi looked over, a cold smile flitting through her eyes. Bailey Lixiang's mouth was even more lovable than Bailey Mingxiang's. Unfortunately, she didn't like it at all. With a look from her, the eunuch reporting to your Majesty, those unruly commoners heard from somewhere that Her Highness the Empress gave everyone a full set of tableware for the birthday banquet. They said that there were thousands of bowls on the table tonight. Before he could finish, Long Fei Yi slammed the table with a loud bang. In an instant, everyone quieted down. Not a single sound could be heard. But after a moment, the Shao clan head, Shaoan, was the first to stand up and kneel. Your Majesty, please quell your anger. At this moment, all the ministers came to their senses and stood up in panic. They left their seats and knelt down. Your Majesty, please quell your anger. Your Majesty, please quell your anger. How could they not be frightened? This was too big a deal. The banquet wasn't over yet, so no one had left. Even the servants hadn't left. The commoners all knew about the tableware. It was clear that someone had leaked the secret, that someone was stirring up trouble behind the scenes, and that someone was even in charge of the affair. Inciting the commoners to slander the Empress and smear the Crown Prince's first birthday banquet was a crime even more serious than rebellion. Slandering the Empress, which had been passed down through generations, paled in comparison to this crime. Bailey Lixiang and Bailey Yuanlong were both stupefied. It wasn't until Bailey Qiyu reminded them that father and daughter hurriedly knelt. Father! Bailey Lixiang cried out, unable to finish her sentence. She'd been tricked. The Bailey clan had been tricked. Although she'd hired those commoners, she'd indeed leaked the news. But she wasn't stupid enough to reveal the tableware and the details of the banquet. Who had leaked the news of the tableware? Was it the Shao clan, or perhaps Han Yunqi herself? Bailey Lixiang couldn't think straight anymore, while Bailey Yuanlong's mind was completely blank. They could only pray that the people they'd bribed wouldn't rat them out. Please don't. But Long Fei Yi said coldly, someone come, immediately arrest those unruly commoners for Jin. Don't let a single one escape. If we don't get an answer tonight, none of them will be allowed to take a single step out of the hall. Bailey Lixiang's heart almost stopped at these words. Bailey Yuanlong's body was already swaying. He couldn't even kneel, properly. Bring them here for interrogation. I'd like to ask them why I'm not fit to be Empress. Chapter 1247. The leaders of the riot were two scholars. Before the two of them were escorted to the main hall, they saw the emperor, the Empress, and a group of ministers sitting in the main hall from afar. Their legs went soft. One fell to the ground while the other knelt, unable to get up. "Your Majesty, have mercy! Your Majesty, have mercy!" This commoner was ordered to do this. "Your Majesty, have mercy! I beg your Majesty to have mercy. This commoner doesn't know anything. Someone ordered us to do this." Everyone in the hall wore different expressions at these words. Han Yunxi sneered inwardly. She'd overestimated these two leaders. She'd thought she'd have to interrogate them after bringing them into the hall. But now, before they even came in, they had already confessed everything. "Who ordered you to do this?" Long Feiyi asked again. Long Feiyi didn't know what Han Yunxi had done, but he wasn't stupid enough to ask who leaked the secret. Long Feiyi's angry voice scared one of them into fainting. Now the hall was completely silent. Bailey Yuanlong and Bailey Lixiang were both trembling. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that a great disaster was about to befall them. The scholar outside the hall was so scared he couldn't speak clearly, his tongue in a knot. Yes, it was a eunuch in the palace who ordered this commoner to do this. Bailey Yuanlong's heart stopped at these words, but Bailey Lixiang was still holding on. She hoped that the eunuch wouldn't betray her. Of course, she'd done this in secret. She hadn't directly negotiated with the two leaders, but through a palace eunuch. This eunuch was called Qin Zhaode. He hadn't personally negotiated with the two scholars either, but through a middleman. As long as the middleman kept his mouth shut and Qin Zhaode didn't leak the secret, they wouldn't be able to find out the truth in a short time. "Who was it?" Long Feiyi asked again. Bailey Lixiang's heart was hanging in the air. She kept comforting herself that Qin Zhaode wasn't that stupid. If he confessed, he'd lose his life too. The scholar didn't say anything for a long time. The little eunuch Qin Zhaode stood to the side, his hands and feet trembling. He didn't dare to raise his head. In the silence, the atmosphere became more and more tense. Bailey Lixiang and Bailey Yuanlong were probably the most nervous people present. Life and death were at stake. "You're not going to say it, are you?" Long Feiyi's cold voice made the people around him fearful. The scholar was scared out of his wits. "This commoner doesn't." Before he could finish speaking, Han Yunxi suddenly spoke. "Someone, drag Qin Zhaode out for this consort. Tell him to endure this for a while." "Yes." Su Donglin replied loudly. Bailey Lixiang and Bailey Yuanlong were both stunned. The scholar had no idea who Qin Zhaode was. He was wondering. Qin Zhaode immediately knelt down in the main hall. "Your Majesty, please spare my life. Your Majesty, please spare me." This servant was forced. This servant was, before he could finish his sentence, Bailey Lixiang threw herself at him like a madwoman. "Don't speak nonsense." As soon as these words were spoken, the originally quiet hall fell into an indescribable silence. Even the world outside was silent. Bailey Lixiang fell at the eunuch's feet, dumbstruck. Only then did she realize what she'd said and done. Heavens! What's wrong with me? Even if Qin Dezhao sold me out, I could still deny it. Even if you beat me to death. She could even use her death to prove her resolve and protect the Bailey clan. But, however, what she did just now was undoubtedly a confession without being pressed. Everyone was looking at her. Some were shocked, some were sympathetic, and some were rejoicing in her misfortune. Of course, the Bailey clan was filled with despair. Qin Dezhao hadn't expected Bailey Lixiang to throw herself at him. He met her eyes, too shocked to say anything. Han Yunxi watched all of this from her high vantage point, her face expressionless. Actually, she didn't know who the two troublemakers had contacted, nor did she know who Bailey Lixiang had told to do it. Su Donglin had caught Chen Dezhao sneaking out of the palace, so she knew that Bailey Lixiang and Chen Dezhao were in cahoots. So, she'd pushed Chen Dezhao out of the hall and let the scholar identify him as the culprit. It was purely a test. More accurately, it was a psychological warfare. The effect of this psychological warfare was really beyond her expectations. She'd only guessed that the mastermind behind Chen Dezhao was here, but never expected Bailey Lixiang to admit it herself. Now she didn't need to waste her breath, nor did she need to waste her breath. It wasn't that she was cruel, or that her methods were despicable. There was no such thing as fair competition in the palace or court, nor was there any such thing as open and aboveboard. She was just giving Bailey Lixiang a taste of her own medicine. She looked at Bailey Lixiang from her lofty vantage point, 3 parts sympathy, 3 parts anger, and 6 parts regret. If Bailey Lixiang was smart enough, she would have stayed in Northernly as a first-rank madam and never come back. How could the Long Fei Yi hand over all of Northernly to Jin Zi? That was a very risky move. Based on her understanding of Northernly and her connections, as long as she had enough patience and time, she'd definitely be able to gain a certain amount of power. Moreover, if the Long Fei Yi needed to restrain Jin Zi in the future, he'd definitely use her. She'd left the Bailey clan for so long, so why did she come back and get involved in this mess? Did she think she had enough ability and intelligence to fight for more benefits for the Bailey clan? How foolish. She must have forgotten. She wasn't the only one who'd managed to climb all the way to the position of imperial noble concubine and become the most favored concubine of the Northern Dynasty's emperors. How much help had the Long Fei Yi's forces in Northernly given her over the past decade? Just how much of Long Fei's advice had he given her on important decisions? Suddenly, Bailey Yuanlong groaned and spat out a mouthful of blood. "Father!" Bailey Qiyu cried out in alarm as he rushed over to support him. Bailey Lixiang finally recovered her wits and anxiously crawled over. "Father! Father!" Bailey Yuanlong wanted to say something, but his mouth remained open as he stared at the Long Fei Yi. In the end, he couldn't speak, and his vision darkened as he fainted. "Your Majesty, it was all my idea. My father and my younger siblings didn't know. It was all my idea. Your Majesty, please save my father. Please save my father." The Long Fei Yi was as cold as an iceberg, expressionless and silent. If the Long Fei Yi didn't speak, no one would dare save Bailey Yuanlong even if he was on the verge of death. After all, inciting the people to revolt was the most serious of crimes. In the worst case, it was punishable by 9 familial exterminations. "Your Majesty, have mercy. This sinner pleads guilty. This sinner pleads guilty. This sinner is at your Majesty's disposal. My father is innocent. Your Majesty, I beg you to have mercy. Your Majesty, please save my father on account of all his hard work over the years. Your Majesty. Esteemed Empress, have mercy. Esteemed Empress." Bailey Lixiang was like a madwoman as she kowtowed incoherently. Bailey Qiyu and his wife also knelt and begged for mercy. Soon enough, the generals and their wives of the Bailey army all knelt as well, including the ministers. But the Long Fei Yi still didn't say a word, his gaze so cold that it was terrifying. The Guigong of Ding, Shaoan, had never expected things to turn out this way. Now, he felt both fear and relief. Back then, Xiao Dong had been so infatuated with Bailey Lixiang that he'd almost done the deed for her. Fortunately, he'd stopped him. Otherwise, he'd be the one vomiting blood and losing consciousness. Bailey Lixiang had colluded with Xiao Dong in an attempt to use the Southern Army's influence to put pressure on the Long Fei Yi. He'd also wanted to borrow the Bailey clan's power to put pressure on the Long Fei Yi. Both sides were aiming for the position of Empress and noble consort, so there was no problem in working together. Fortunately, he'd kept his cool and wasn't impatient. Otherwise, he'd have been implicated today. The Bailey clan's members were all kneeling on the ground, their pleas filling the hole. Long Fei Yi was like an emotionless god, looking down on them from high above. How many of them could see the anger and disappointment in his eyes? Han Yunxi didn't need to look to know Long Fei Yi was suffering. How could she not be suffering too? She wasn't the true princess of Western Qin, and she hadn't spent much time with the D clan. If the D clan had betrayed her and done something like this, she'd be angry and disappointed. Moreover, Long Fei Yi's relationship with the Bailey clan wasn't just a simple master-servant relationship. Bailey Yuanlong should have been the one who understood Long Fei Yi the most. Even if he was a crude man who wasn't meticulous enough and couldn't see through his master's thoughts after all these years, he should have been the most loyal person. But after the founding of the country, the Bailey clan had been the most outrageous and unbridled in the court's power struggles. Not to mention those who rejoiced in their misfortune, it was already good enough that they didn't kick them while they were down. Even those who'd benefited from Bailey Yuanlong and had been friends with him for many years didn't dare speak up in the face of the furious Long Fei Yi. The unconscious Bailey Yuanlong suddenly coughed up another mouthful of blood. Father! Father! Bailey Lixiang and Bailey Qiyu didn't know what to do. Everyone else was also trembling with fear. This old general who'd followed the emperor the longest, who'd watched him grow up, and who was the pillar of the Bailey clan, was he really going to die in the main hall like this? Finally, someone stood up in the silence. It was none other than Grand Tutor Gu Beiyue. Your Majesty, the Crown Prince's first birthday is a joyous occasion. For the Crown Prince's sake, please spare General Bailey's life. There are still many things we don't understand and need to investigate in detail, Gu Beiyue said seriously. It was impossible for the Empress to plead for mercy. Aside from her, only the Grand Tutor had the guts to persuade him. Bailey Lixiang and Bailey Qiyu both grew nervous. The Bailey clan also looked over, their hearts thumping in fear. But Long Fei Yi said, Empress, the Crown Prince is young and doesn't know any better. You decide for the Crown Prince on this matter. Now, Bailey Lixiang was in complete despair. The rest of the Bailey clan also lost their strength. If Han Yunxi made the decision, it'd be strange if Han Yunxi didn't torture the Bailey clan to death. The Bailey clan was finished. Chapter 1248. What kind of decision would Han Yunxi make? If possible, she would demote the Bailey clan to commoners, but she couldn't be willful. As the Empress, she shouldered her responsibilities. As the head of the military, she shouldered her responsibilities as well. Moreover, Long Fei Yi had given her the power to decide, which made her even more responsible. Those who had their eyes on the Empress's seat and the head of the military only saw the Empress's power and glory. Had they ever considered the price they had to pay to sit by the Emperor's side? The Bailey clan couldn't fall. Once they did, Jiangnan's power would grow even stronger. There'd be unavoidable infighting in the military. The current balance of power in the imperial court would change as well. The north was still in turmoil, and all of Cloud Realm continent was still recovering from the war. It would be unwise to spend too much time and energy on infighting in the imperial court. Moreover, Bailey Yuanlong didn't just control the Bailey clan. He had countless soldiers under his command as well, all of whom were innocent. Han Yunxi had never thought of destroying the Bailey clan, because she couldn't find anyone more suitable than them to lead the Central Army, much less control the navy. Another important reason was that only the Bailey clan could fight against the Southern Army at the moment. Rather than destroy them and let the southern armies show off, it was better to drive a wedge between the two sides. Just who was it that leaked the secret of the tableware? Most likely, the Bailey clan would suspect the Shao clan. She only needed to add fuel to the fire from the shadows to break the alliance between the Bailey and Shao clan. Once the Bailey clan bore a grudge against the southern armies, it'd save her and Long Fei Yi a lot of trouble in the future. Of course, even if they didn't destroy the Bailey clan, they'd at least deal them a heavy blow. Only then would they hate the Shao clan even more. Your Majesty, the Crown Prince's first birthday is a joyous occasion. It's bad enough to see blood. As Qinxia sees it, let's lock up the people involved in the matter in the imperial prisons to await trial. As for how many of the Bailey clan members are accomplices, leave it to the justice courts to investigate. Deal with them as you see fit. Han Yunxi said seriously. Long Fei Yi nodded. Men, take Bailey Lixiang away. Bailey Lixiang didn't resist, but she looked towards the Shao clan. Back then, they'd said they'd come together to persuade her, but the Shao clan still hadn't stepped forward. They must have been the ones who leaked the secret of the tableware. What a good Shao Dong. He actually dared to go back on his words and frame her and the Bailey clan. Even if she died, she would drag the Shao family down with her. Definitely. She had a lot of evidence in her hands. Bailey Lixiang and Bailey Yuanlong were escorted away. Aside from Bailey Qiyu and his wife, the rest of the Shao family didn't dare to leave. After such a big thing happened, the Emperor and Empress must be in a bad mood. Everyone lowered their heads in fear. No one dared to make a sound. They all hoped that the banquet would end quickly. However, Han Yunxi sighed with emotion. Your Majesty, it seems that there are many people outside the palace who are dissatisfied with this concubine. If this concubine doesn't express herself, people might think that this concubine really doesn't care about Northern Li's disaster victims. As soon as Han Yunxi spoke, everyone went on guard. Even those who hadn't been afraid of her before and hadn't personally experienced her skills were now afraid. A few madams had planned to use this occasion to make trouble for Han Yunxi over the red packets. But now, they exchanged glances and shook their heads. They didn't dare act rashly. The madams decided to let the matter of the red packets go. Would Han Yunxi let it go as well? How does the Empress want to express herself? Long Fei Yi asked. Your Majesty, the Crown Prince received many gifts today. Why don't we auction them off and donate all the proceeds to Northern Li's disaster victims? Han Yunxi asked seriously. Excellent. Long Fei Yi naturally agreed. He cast a glance at Gu from the corner of his eyes and said, then let's start from the auction of the number 7 tea house. Gu didn't have any interest in the battle in the imperial court. He was sitting lazily, waiting for the banquet to end. He was sleepy, hungry, and bored. But when he heard that Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi wanted to bid for the number 7 tea house, he immediately became spirited and said loudly, What? Why? Does Prince Yu have an opinion about bidding for the Crown Prince's item? Long Fei Yi asked. Of course there is. Gu almost said that he had an opinion. Fortunately, Gu Beiyue stopped him in time to remind him that this was a public occasion and he must not be presumptuous. Of course not. Gu immediately changed his words, but his gaze was even more bitter and angry. He actually wanted to auction off the tea house that he had painstakingly prepared for a year to exchange for silver. Was Long Fei Yi lacking in silver? He turned back to look at the ministers below and coldly said, the value of the number 7 tea house is immeasurable. Ben Wang would like to see what price it can be auctioned for. Long Fei Yi said, the tea house in the number 7 tea house is deeply in Jin's heart. From Jin's point of view, it must be a sky-high price. Gu was even more bitter as he scolded in his heart, Long Fei Yi, it is deeply in your heart and you still want to sell it off. Is there a problem with your head? Han Yunxi almost laughed out. She just started the auction and Long Fei Yi was able to play it like this. He really was an expert. Long Fei Yi said that the number 7 tea house could be auctioned for a sky-high price. Even if the emperor and empress wanted to use money from the national treasury, they had to go through the proper procedures. In the past year, all parts of the Great Qin Empire needed money. The central government departments needed money, and all the local officials had come to the Ministry of Revenue to beg for money. Fortunately, the construction of Yuning Palace and Tian'an Imperial Palace had been funded by Long Fei Yi himself. Otherwise, the national treasury would have been empty by now. Not only in the past year, but also in the next few years, the national treasury would not be sufficient. The Minister of Revenue had calculated that according to the current situation of tax revenue, in the next 3 years, the national treasury would always be in a situation where its expenditure exceeded its income. Very soon, it would need the private treasury of the royal family to supplement it. The national treasury's income came from all kinds of taxes, mainly from agriculture and commerce. Agriculture accounted for a large portion of the income. Many merchants could still make use of the war to make a fortune, but agriculture was the industry that had suffered the most. Once war broke out, most of the able-bodied men would be enlisted as soldiers. How many people would be left to farm? Moreover, how many fields had been destroyed in the chaos of war? In the past year, 80 to 90% of the national treasury's silver and grain had come from the southern regions. Almost all of the other regions had given it away. It was precisely because the southern regions had contributed so much to the national treasury that the powerful officials and soldiers there were the most arrogant and proud of themselves. Those aristocrats of aristocratic families and meritorious generals all believed that they had given the Long Fei Yi enough support in the past to let Long Fei Yi have nothing to worry about. Now they had made the greatest contribution to the national treasury, helping other places rebuild after the war and helping Northernly tide over its difficulties. Thus, the Long Fei Yi should repay them by giving them the greatest power and glory. But if not for the Long Fei Yi's invasion of the south during Tian'an's civil strife, would the central and southern regions have enjoyed so many years of peace? After all, the central and southern regions were fertile lands with thousands of kilometers of fertile land. Who in the world didn't covet these lands? If the Long Fei Yi had gone to the western regions or the northern regions during Tian'an's civil strife, the central and southern regions would have been the first to fall into chaos. The Great Qin Empire's national treasury had close ties with the southern regions, but the imperial family's private storehouses were at odds with the southern financial groups. The imperial family's private storehouse was the imperial family's little storehouse. More accurately, it was the emperor's little storehouse. Generally speaking, the income of the imperial family's private storehouses came from monopolized industries like silk, tea leaves, salt, and mining. The imperial family's private storehouses spent a lot of money as well. Most of it was used to build palaces, pay for all the expenses of the imperial family, and support their relatives and nobles. For example, duchies and duchies were raised by the royal family for generations. The Great Qin imperial family's private storehouses were mostly supported by the Long Fei Yi's personal savings. Even now, there wasn't much income. That was because most of the silk, tea leaves, salt, and mining industries were still in the hands of the southern financial groups. The tax system had yet to be revised. Chapter 1249. The Great Qin's national treasury was poor, but the emperor wasn't poor, and neither were his ministers. If the national treasury didn't have enough money, the emperor's private coffers would have to pay for it. If there came a day when the emperor's private coffers couldn't support the enormous expenditure, then the emperor's private coffers would have to pay for it. When that time came, the financial groups would become even more arrogant. The reform of the tax system was imperative, but how could it be so easy to reform the tax system? Not long ago, the Ministry of Revenue had proposed raising the taxes on tea and tobacco in Jiangnan, but the tea and tobacco farmers in Jiangnan had immediately objected. It would take at least 2 to 3 years for the tax reform to be finalized. Without taxes, the national treasury and the imperial family's private coffers would have nowhere to draw their money. The financial groups in Jiangnan were opposed to the tax system, and they didn't take the initiative to donate. Moreover, they wanted to enjoy the salary and benefits of a noble title. Long Feiyi had long since been annoyed. Han Yunxi had come up with the idea of bidding for the crown prince's birthday banquet, but Long Feiyi wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to ruthlessly swindle those financial groups. Gu's bid of 30 million taels of silver was met with silence. Duke Ding Xiaoan furrowed his brows as if he was pondering something, while Xiao Dong of the southern military region repeatedly shot him meaningful glances. At first, Xiaoan didn't understand whether Xiao Dong wanted him to bid or not. However, when Xiao Dong looked at the 2 empty seats, he immediately understood what was going on. Not long ago, something had happened in the West. There was a leather merchant in the West who was known as Boss Chin. In the name of his daughter, he had donated a large number of leather vests to the disaster victims in Northernly to help them resist the cold. He had also donated 10 million taels of silver to the imperial capital, saying that he wanted to treat the construction workers to wine. The construction of the imperial capital required a large number of laborers. Some were transferred from the army, while others were recruited from the common folk. The soldiers in the army were paid a fixed salary, so they didn't have to be paid. However, the able-bodied men recruited from the common folk had to be paid on time. These wages naturally came from the imperial treasury. Tang Zijin was Long Feiyi's uncle, so he loved the imperial treasury. He had taken a lot of money from the Tang clan to supplement the extra expenses. Boss Chen said that the 10 million was for the drinks, but it was actually a donation. Boss Chen made it sound quite nice, saying that the laborers were working hard for Great Qin, and that he was quite old and regretful that he could not personally participate. As such, he was willing to pay for the laborers to drink to show his sincerity and strength. As soon as this matter came out, Long Feiyi immediately conferred the title of County Duke to reward Boss Chin for his concern for the people. Xiaoan followed Xiao Dong's line of sight and looked at the 2 empty seats. He was really tempted by the matter of contacting Boss Chin. For a banquet of this scale, every seat had been arranged. How could there be any empty seats? The banquet was about to end, but the 2 seats on the secondary seats were still empty. What did the emperor mean? Could it be that, as everyone had guessed, the emperor intended to confer the title of Commandery Prince at the banquet? If he performed well today, would he be conferred a title like Boss Chin in the West? The Xiao family did not lack money, but they lacked status. The title of County Duke did not make Xiaoan feel proud. On the contrary, it made him feel inferior. He was already wavering, but under Xiao Dong's repeated urging, he finally opened his mouth. 50 million. As soon as Xiaoan said this, the crowd became even more silent. In fact, there were still some people who were hesitant. However, since Xiaoan had spoken, who would have the courage to compete with him? As expected, the Xiao clan head is generous, Long Fei praised. Xiaoan quickly stood up. This humble subject does not dare to be rash in front of your majesty. I just want to do my part for the victims of the disaster in Northernly, he. If my great Qin has a few more people like County Duke Chen and Guogong Ding who worry about the country, then Zhen's hair will have fewer white hairs, Long Fei teased, his mood much better. Long Feiyi was a man of few words, and Long Yi was even less. As soon as he said this, the people below could figure it out for a long time. As soon as Shaoan heard the emperor mention County Duke Qin, he grew even more excited and determined to win the bid for number 7 tea house. Gu had no idea what County Duke Qin was talking about, much less why Long Feiyi had left behind 2 secondary seats. He only knew that if Shaoan dared to compete with Long Feiyi for number 7 tea house, he was simply seeking death, 60 million taels. Gu said loudly. As soon as his voice trailed off, everyone was dumbfounded. This was far too shocking. Number 7 tea house didn't occupy a large area. At most, it could be considered a medium-sized tea house. In Cloud Realm Continent's current economic situation, 60 million taels was a sky-high price. Everyone knew that Gu was rich, but they never expected Gu to be so rich. Han Yunxi, Gu Beiwe, Tang Li, and the rest all looked towards Gu Qishao, all of them thinking the same thing. If Shaoan stopped raising the price, Gu Qishao would become the biggest sucker in Long Fei's scheme this time. But to everyone's surprise, Shaoan continued to bid without hesitation. 80 million. Shaoan was still very polite. Your Highness Prince Yu, this official rarely has the chance to offer his heart to the northernly disaster victims. I hope you will let me win. Gu was already in a bad mood, so he didn't know how to write the word polite. He raised his eyebrows and looked disdainfully at him, saying loftily, let what? 90 million taels. Finally, the crowd couldn't hold back any longer and burst into an uproar. Even Han Yunxi and the rest didn't expect Gu to be so rich. But it wasn't strange when they thought about it. Gu was one of the 3 heavyweights of the 3-way black market. In his early years, he made huge profits from his business in medicinal herbs and tea houses. More importantly, Gu was different from the Long Feiyi and the other financial groups. Gu was alone and had enough to feed his entire family. Compared to the Long Feiyi and the other financial groups, his expenses should be the least. It had to be said that Shaoan was very, very surprised. He couldn't help but reevaluate Gu, the only prince of Great Qin. 200 million taels wasn't a small sum. Shaoan's resolute heart began to waver. If he continued to bid and used 90 million taels of silver to exchange for the title of Junwang, he would be more than happy to do so. However, he was worried that if he continued to compete with Gu, the price of the auction would rise to the point where it would go out of control. Of course, if it was within his means, he would still be willing to spend money to exchange for the title of Junwang. More importantly, he wasn't completely sure if the emperor would bestow him the title of prince if he was in a good mood. Shaoan hesitated. Is there anyone else who dares to compete with this prince? Gu asked arrogantly as he sat down carelessly. The crowd was silent. Shaoan and Xiaodong looked at each other with furrowed brows. This emperor. Long Feiyi suddenly opened his mouth. For a moment, no one understood what he meant. Gu didn't understand either. 100 million. When Long Feiyi said this, everyone understood what he meant. He was also participating in the auction. The money for disaster relief was allocated from the national treasury by the Ministry of Revenue. The imperial family's private treasury didn't pay for it. They only donated a few taels of silver in the name of the imperial family. Long Feiyi's 100 million had to be taken from the imperial family's private treasury. It was said that the auction was free to bid and there was no need to be restrained by etiquette. However, who would dare to compete with the emperor? Shaoan definitely wouldn't dare. However, Gu definitely dared. 110 million. Gu immediately increased the price. 120 million. Long Feiyi followed closely. 130 million. Gu wasn't willing to be outdone. 150 million. Long Feiyi didn't budge an inch. The crowd was so silent that even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard. The smell of gunpowder between Long Fei Yi and Gu was getting stronger and stronger. It was almost to the point where they were about to start arguing. Everyone was terrified. However, not only did Gu not give in, he continued to press on. The price of the auction soared all the way to a jaw-dropping 230 million taels of silver. Han Yunxi and Gu Beiyue were stunned. This wasn't how things should be. Why were these two fellows fighting amongst themselves? If they continued to fight like this, where would Shaoan get the chance to perform? They would be scared off by Shaoan. 250 million. Long Fei Yi slammed the table. Han Yunxi sucked in a cold breath in shock. She knew that Long Fei Yi could afford it, but he shouldn't spend it so unjustly. He said that he was going to scam others today. Why did he scam his own private savings? Long Fei Yi slammed the table. Everyone was even more terrified. However, Gu was simply looking down on the emperor's prestige. He said, 260 million. In a moment, everyone looked at him. Previously, many people were dissatisfied with him being conferred the title of prince. However, after seeing his big spending, many people really admired him. Long Fei Yi didn't immediately increase the price like before. Instead, he looked at Gu coldly. The smell of gunpowder between the two of them could be smelled by anyone. Amidst the silence and tension, Shaoan suddenly stood up and said loudly, "Reporting to your majesty, this old subject boldly adds another 10 million, 270 million. This, Shaoan increased the price after Gu increased the price. This could be considered as competing with Gu, not with Long Fei Yi, right? Even so, he still used the word boldly. Long Fei Yi's eyes flashed with a sneer as he asked, "Duke Ding is so sincere. Prince Yu, are you still going to increase the price?" Gu felt that Long Fei Yi's words were strange, but he didn't think much about it. In any case, no matter what, the number 7 tea house couldn't fall into the hands of others. He didn't think much about it and increased the price again. At this moment, Gu Beiyue secretly tugged at his sleeve and murmured, "Little Qi, that's enough." Enough? Gu instantly woke up and realized that this might be a trap. He was silent for a moment and immediately waved his hand dispiritedly. "Enough, enough. Duke Ding's family has a lot of money, everyone knows. This prince won't compete with him." Ha ha ha. Long Fei Yi laughed and seemed to be in a very good mood. He looked at the officials. "Is there anyone else who wants to increase the price? Who would dare? Who would dare?" No one made a sound. Shaoan looked at Long Fei Yi's extremely good mood and his nervous heart relaxed a little. He had been struggling, pondering, and evaluating. In fact, he had almost given up. However, seeing Gu provoking the emperor like that, he threw caution to the wind. As long as he suppressed Gu's price, the emperor would be happy. Chapter 1250. Long Fei Yi's laughter made Shaoan very satisfied. He was certain that he had made the right decision and looked forward to being conferred a higher title. "Since no one is bidding, I announce that number 7 tea house will be won by Duke Ding and all proceeds will be donated to the disaster areas in the north. Men, send the deed to Duke Ding." At Long Fei's words, Shaoan hastened to speak up. "Your Majesty, this official only wants to do what I can for Northern Li's disaster victims. Number 7 tea house is a gift from the Prince of Yu to the Crown Prince. This official doesn't dare to covet it." Shaoan took the deed and personally presented it to the Crown Prince. Little Rui looked at his imperial father, then at his imperial mother, and then at Grand Tutor Gu Beiyue. He did not say anything for a long time. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi also did not say anything. Gu Beiyue only smiled at Rui. "Your Highness, this is the Shao family's sincerity. I hope your Highness will accept it." Shaowen said respectfully. Little Rui looked at him with a serious expression, as if thinking about something. Shaowen waited patiently with his back bent. Everyone looked on and sighed in their hearts. They were sighing about the Shao family's wealth. The great Qin Empire's treasury was so poor, but the Shao family was rich. Wasn't the Shao family's limelight a bit too much? They were sighing about how the Shao family fawned on the crown prince. Everyone knew that the nobles in the south had their eyes on the empress and imperial concubine. The Shao family's patriarch actually gave such a gift at the crown prince's birthday banquet. Shao An's thoughts were all on the second seat. He was immersed in his dream of being conferred the title of prince and did not think too much. Finally, little Rui reached out and took the deed. Little Rui said, "Imperial father, I like him." Long Fei laughed, "I like him too. I believe that the people of Northernly will like him too. Men, write a decree to confer Duke Ding as a prince. His title is Ding." As soon as these words came out, everyone was even more shocked. Shaowen was stunned at first, but then he quickly retreated and knelt down to express his gratitude. Just like that, Shaowen was promoted from a duke to a royal prince. He immediately sat on one of the two empty seats in the secondary seat. It had to be said that everyone present, including many high-ranking officials of the southern faction, could not see through the current situation. After that, a few more items were auctioned off. Shaowen and Gu remained silent, leaving the opportunity to their ministers. Long Fei had previously conferred 2 dukes. Originally, there were 4 grand dukes. Now, excluding Shaowen, who had been promoted, there were 5 grand dukes in total. Looking at the last seat, everyone thought of the Bailey clan. Could it be that this seat was originally prepared for Bailey Yuanlong? Although the emperor had used various methods to cheat everyone of their money, the matter was definitely not as simple as that. There were many people who had donated 50 million yuan today, but the emperor had conferred 2 dukes. Why were there 2 of them instead of 1 or 3? After the birthday banquet, the 100 Lane family would definitely be dealt with, and Great Qin's situation would most likely change. Now that the situation had changed, everyone's standpoint would change as well. Everyone's hearts were heavy because of their hunger. When the left and right congratulatory gifts were auctioned off, Long Fei said, "Come, list out today's gift list and the bidding price, and announce it to the world. The generosity of the ministers is a blessing for us, the Crown Prince, and even more so for the people of the North." Everyone's hearts were originally heavy, but when they heard this, the high-ranking officials of the Jiangnan and Bailey factions who had given ordinary gifts almost cried. They had originally thought that they could use the Empress extravagance to save some money. But now, things had turned out like this. How would the common people know everything that happened at the birthday banquet? Every detail. If this gift list was leaked, wouldn't they be scolded for being stingy and shabby? Scams. This was simply too much of a scam. No matter who it was, no matter how powerful they were or how rich their family was, it was impossible for them to stand in front of the Empress and Empress. When the birthday banquet ended, Mu Ling, who had been hiding at the side, finally walked out. She knelt in the hall and presented a red envelope with both hands. "Your Majesty, Empress, Your Highness the Crown Prince, Ling, would like to offer a token of appreciation to the disaster victims. This is a red envelope bestowed by Her Majesty the Empress during the New Year. It is the first red envelope given by Her Majesty the Empress. Ling originally kept it as a souvenir, but now, I offer it together with the bidding price. Ling hopes that this token of appreciation can warm the people of the North." Gu was puzzled. When did this girl, Mu Ling, become so eloquent? How long had it been since he last saw her? Had she really grown up? How much money could a red envelope hide? However, when she said this, it really was a heavy and meaningful token of appreciation. Haha, Your Majesty, our family's has grown up. Han Yunxi laughed. The word our family elevated Mu Ling's status to such a high level that no one dared to look down on her. At this moment, the madams in the hall exchanged glances. After all, they'd all brought empty red envelopes today. Originally, they'd planned to slap the Empress in the face. But after Bailey Lixiang was imprisoned, they'd all restrained themselves and didn't dare to be impudent. Mu Ling had offered up her red envelope, so after the banquet, the other madams and young misses would surely follow suit. What were they going to do with their empty red envelopes? Sitting next to Xiao Dong, Madame Xiao grew anxious. Master, what should we do? We'll talk when we get back. Xiao Dong muttered unhappily. He was still immersed in the joy of Xiao An's coronation, so how could he care about something as trivial as a red envelope? Just like that, the Crown Prince's birthday banquet ended with Mu Ling donating a red envelope. After Chang Fei Yi and the others left, the other ministers followed suit. Outside the palace, a group of ministers surrounded Xiao An to congratulate him. There was no lack of supporters of Bailey Yuanlong among them. This made Bailey Yuanlong's two trusted aides furious. They went to the Bailey estate that very night to complain. Bailey Yuanlong was still unconscious. Bailey Mingxiang's eyes were red from crying as he personally stood guard. Bailey Qiyu came out to greet the guests. By the time Bailey Qiyu returned, it was already midnight. Mingxiang, go beg esteemed Empress. Before Bailey Qiyu could finish, Bailey Mingxiang cut him off. I'm not going. You'll have to clean up your own mess. Esteemed Empress has always treated the Xiao family well. Brother, father and eldest sister are muddle-headed, but are you going to follow suit? The invitation to the Crown Prince's birthday banquet was for her father, brother, and family members. No one was specifically named. She had the right to attend, and her eldest sister had urged her to come. But she'd purposely waited for the banquet to start before entering the city. How could she not want to attend? How could she not want to see the Emperor and Empress, the Little Master, the Grand Tutor, and Miss Ling? But she didn't go in the end and stayed at home. She could participate in the bustle of the past, but the bustle of the present had nothing to do with her. Being able to survive was the greatest bustle of her life. Bailey Qiyu was stunned. He'd never seen his sister lose her temper before. Mingxiang, you know father and eldest sister's temper. Can I stop them? Bailey Qiyu asked helplessly. You know His Majesty's temper too. What can I say? Bailey Mingxiang asked. Go beg esteemed Empress. As long as she's willing to show mercy, His Majesty will definitely show mercy. For Bailey Qiyu and the entire Bailey family, Bailey Mingxiang was their only hope. Sister, take it as your brother begging you. Go to the palace now. It'll be too late if His Majesty goes to court tomorrow morning. Bailey Mingxiang shook his head. You really don't understand her. Brother, esteemed Empress won't see me. You. Bailey Qiyu was furious. Sister, did you know that Xiaoan was made a Junwang? We've been set up by the Xiao family this time. Go tell esteemed Empress that the Xiao family had a part to play in inciting public anger. It was the Xiao family who instigated eldest sister. Bailey Mingxiang was expressionless and didn't move from her spot. Bailey Qiyu was about to go crazy from anxiety. At this moment, Bailey Yuanlong suddenly woke up and stared blankly at Bailey Qiyu. You, what did you say? Father's awake. Bailey Mingxiang wanted to take his pulse, but Bailey Yuanlong waved her hand away. Made a Junwang, who was made a Junwang. Bailey Yuanlong stared fixedly at his son. Although Bailey Chiyu didn't want to say it, he had to under his father's gaze. Father, His Majesty auctioned off the Crown Prince's gifts. Shaoan spent a lot of money to please His Majesty, so His Majesty made him a Junwang on the spot. Bailey Yuanlong was stunned. After a while, he muttered, Shaoan. Shaoan sat in the secondary seat. And, who else? Father, of the 2 empty secondary seats, one was given to Shaoan, and the other has always been empty. Bailey Yuanlong seemed to have thought of something. His eyes widened, and he suddenly cried out, Master, this old official was wrong. Wrong. This old official. Before he could finish, he spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes widened, and his hand fell to his side as he breathed his last. Father. Father. Bailey Mingxiang and Bailey Chiyu didn't expect this. Bailey Mingxiang threw herself at him and wailed, Father. Father. Bailey Chiyu fell heavily to his knees, completely stupefied. Father is gone. Bailey Chiyu didn't know how long he remained in a daze. Finally, he got up and ordered a servant to report the death to the palace. At this moment, Han Yunxi and Long Fei Ye's group had just eaten supper and hadn't gone to bed yet. Gu had lost a bet to Gu, but he was very indignant and insisted that Gu Beiyue had cheated by teaching Rui, how to hold the seal in advance. No one knew whether Gu Beiyue had taught Rui, or not. Gu held Rui, in his arms and asked several times, but Rui, refused to say. Just as Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were about to make a bet, Tang Li and Ning Jing were about to make a bet, and Mu Ling, was especially interested in making a bet as well. Thus, Han Yunxi ordered for the 66 items to be brought over, and Rui had to pick them again. Rui secretly rolled his eyes at his imperial mother. Only the heavens knew what he was thinking. However, he was very cooperative. Since it was a new bet, everyone chose again, but the stakes didn't change. While Rui stared blankly at the 66 items, the adults each wrote down their own guesses on a piece of paper and handed it to Granny Zhao. Mu Ling was a newcomer. She glanced at Chi brother and said with a smile, Chi brother, I want to bet with you too. Gu was suspicious. It wasn't strange that this girl didn't pester him in the hole. He thought that she would immediately pester him after returning and ask him why he ran away, but she didn't. Moreover, her attitude was as if nothing had happened. Actually, Mu Linger's attitude only made Gu Qishao uneasy. Chi brother, do you dare? Mu Ling urged. Chapter 1251. Gu was very uneasy that Mu Ling didn't pursue the matter of him running away from Medical City. If Mu Ling really didn't pursue the matter, he would have an easy time. He was afraid. He was afraid that Mu Ling had some tricks up her sleeve. Chi brother, you don't dare to bet with me. Mu Ling laughed. What are we betting on? Gu asked. What does Chi brother want to bet on? Mu Ling asked. Up to you. Gu was on his guard. Mu Linger giggled as she drew closer to Gu Qishao's ear. It was unclear what she said in a low voice, but Gu Qishao froze. Mu Ling stepped back and asked, Do you dare? Gu hesitated, but he still agreed. No problem. If you lose, you can't go back on your word. Mu Ling chuckled and went to the side to write down her guess. She immediately folded it and handed it to Granny Zhao. No one knew what Gu and Mu Ling's bet was. But when they saw Gu's serious expression, they felt that Mu Ling's bet wouldn't be simple. Just like that, the 7 of them formed 4 bets. At this time, Rue was still struggling in front of a pile of things. He wanted a lot of things. How should he choose? Han Yunxi and the others sat around and watched. They were all calm and relaxed, as if they could afford to win or lose. On the other hand, Granny Zhao stood on the other side of the 66 items, facing the Crown Prince. She didn't participate in the bet, but she was very nervous. She carefully flipped open the booklet and read it again. She couldn't remember what the masters were betting on. In these 4 bets, Han Yunxi and Long Feiyi played a game. Han Yunxi bet that Rue would choose the abacus while Long Feiyi bet that Rue would choose the hidden weapon. The loser had to eat the winner's noodles. Tang Li and Ning Jing played around. Tang Li bet that Rue would choose the account book while Ning Jing bet that Rue would choose the sword. The winner would control the finances of the couple. Gu Beiyue and Gu played 1 round. Gu Beiyue bet that Rue would choose the seal while Gu bet that Rue would choose the gold ingot. The loser had to serve the winner for a day. Gu and Mu Ling played 1 round. As for what Mu Ling was betting on Rue's choice, Granny Zhao couldn't help but laugh. At this moment, Rue turned to look at Han Yunxi with a confused expression. 1. No, you can take as many as you want. Take as many as you like, Han Yunxi said hurriedly. Rue immediately grinned. He turned back to the pile of things and began to pick carefully. Everyone's eyes immediately gathered on him. Suddenly, Rue squatted down. There was an account book, an abacus, and a sword beside him. Han Yunxi, Ning Jing, and Tang Li were all nervous. Rue suddenly grabbed the abacus. Han Yunxi rejoiced and flashed a provocative smile at Long Fei, incomparably happy. If it wasn't for the fact that she couldn't disturb Rue, she would have laughed out loud. As expected of her biological son, she won the first thing he grabbed. Long Feiyi glanced at Han Yunxi. He was still very calm. Rue choosing the account book didn't mean that Han Yunxi had one. Rue could still choose the hidden weapon. Han Yunxi was overjoyed. Who knew that Rue would throw the abacus back when he felt that it was meaningless? This, Han Yunxi's smile froze. Long Feiyi turned around and looked deeply at Han Yunxi. He was clearly mocking her. Han Yunxi wanted to grab Rue and kiss him. Was he playing with her? Long Feiyi and Han Yunxi were flirting. Ning Jing and Tang Li were both nervous because Rue picked up the account book and sword at the same time. Tang Li was betting on the account book while Ning Jing was betting on the sword. How could they not be nervous? Rue squatted there and looked at the account book seriously. Tang Li stroked Tang's little head with anticipation. Rue put down the sword and walked towards Granny Zhao with the account book in both hands. Tang Li's smile widened. He whispered to Ning Jing, "My brother knows how to look at account books since he was young. He must have learned this from him." Ning Jing was resentful and didn't even bother to look at him. Who knew that Rue would throw the account book at Granny Zhao's feet and say, "No"? Everyone was stunned at first and couldn't help but laugh. Only Tang Li's face darkened. Other children picked what they liked. It seemed that Rue picked what he didn't like and threw it out. Han Yunxi patted her chest subconsciously. She was very glad that her son put the abacus back. When Rue returned to the pile of things, everyone became nervous again. But it was a different kind of nervousness. Previously, they were looking forward to Rue using their own things. Now, they couldn't wait for Rue to stay away from those things. Rue also walked over to the pile of toys and pastries. He frowned and looked at them with disdain. He sat down cross-legged and waved at Tang Tang. "Tang, do you want to eat?" he asked in a childish voice. Little Tang Tang was a little sleepy. When she heard the word eat, she immediately perked up and her eyes lit up. "Eat!" She nodded vigorously. Tang Li and Ning Jing were particularly helpless. Little Tang Tang had never been interested in other people's things. No matter how fun or delicious it was, she didn't care. Why was she not immune to Rui-er's things? "Come," Rui-er said seriously. Little Tang Tang immediately jumped out of her father's arms. Rui-er ran to the side and dragged a small bamboo basket in front of Tang Tang. He still said seriously in a childish voice, "Put it in." Was he letting little Tang Tang take as much as she wanted and take whatever she wanted? "Thank you, little brother." Tang Tang was happy. "I don't like you, little brother." Rui-er ignored her and lowered his head to pick other things. Tang Tang took the food first and put all kinds of pastries into the basket before putting in the toys. No one chose the pastries or toys. Everyone knew that Rui-er didn't like these two things. Therefore, no one paid much attention to Tang Tang and focused on Rui-er. Rui had already thrown away several things, including some copper coins, rulers, and ornaments. Suddenly, Tang Tang picked up the seal and asked, "Little brother, is it for me?" As soon as she said that, everyone immediately looked over. Ning Jing's face turned pale. Gu was the first to laugh out loud. Han Yunqi also couldn't stop laughing. If this happened at today's birthday banquet, the Tang sect would probably be finished. However, in private, Han Yunqi didn't mind at all. Long Fei Ye's calm expression didn't seem to mind either. However, Ning Jing was also frightened. She was about to reprimand them when Han Yunqi stopped her and whispered, "It's just a game. Let them be." Tang Li also felt that it was inappropriate. However, Long Fei Yi looked over and said faintly, "Let's see what Rui-er wants." "It's fine." With Long Fei Ye's words, Tang Li and Ning Jing felt more at ease. However, they didn't dare to completely relax. What if Rui-er didn't give it to her and Tang Tang insisted? She was still a child. Although she was taught well, her nature couldn't be suppressed. How could she be very sensible? Little Tang Tang held up the seal. Rui-er looked over suspiciously. When he saw the seal, he immediately ran over. "No. Not giving. Not giving." He said "not giving" 3 times in a row, showing how determined he was. He ran in front of Tang Tang but didn't directly snatch the seal. Instead, he reached out and said, "Give it to me." Little Tang Tang was frightened by Rui-er's aggressiveness. She quickly handed the seal to him and said 3 times in a row, "No. No. No." She didn't want it. Long Fei Yi laughed. Everyone else was amused and roared with laughter. Tang Li and Ning Jing's worried hearts finally settled down. Little Tang Tang also had a backbone. She dragged a basket of food and toys and happily returned to her father's side. She didn't want anything else from Rui-er. Rui-er put the seal back and began to pick other things. "Looks like I won." Gu Beiyue chuckled softly. I might not lose," Gu said disdainfully. As soon as he said that, Rui-er picked up the gold ingot that Gu bet. Seeing this, Gu Qixiao's eyes widened. Mu Linger grew nervous as well and held her breath. The gold ingot was so big that Rui-er couldn't hold it with one hand. He had to hold it with both hands. How could this child not love money? Gu murmured. His father had cheated so much money from the officials. How could he not love money? How could Rue not love money? He didn't recognize the banknotes, but he recognized the shiny gold ingot. He held the gold ingot and ran to Han Yunxi. "Mother, for you." Han Yunxi was amused. "Rue, you don't want it." "No, it's for mother," Rue answered seriously. He stole his mother's banknotes but gave her the gold ingot. This child really made people laugh and cry. When he grew up and became sensible, how would he react when he found out about the embarrassing things that happened to him when he was young? Han Yunxi accepted it graciously and stroked Rue's head. She didn't forget to kiss him and said seriously, "Son, if you see gold in the future, you have to give it to mother, okay?" Rue nodded immediately. "Okay." Gu looked at Han Yunxi and said seriously, "Poison girl, you can't cheat a child of his money like this. Quickly return it to him." Han Yunxi really wanted to return the gold ingot to Rue, but he didn't want it and stuffed it back to her. "Rue, you really don't want it?" Han Yunxi asked seriously. "No." Rue was serious. Han Yunxi looked at Gu. Without her saying more, Gu was already listless. Gu hugged his knees and sat sideways on the chair, staring at Rue resentfully. He glanced at Mu Ling, who was sitting not far away. He might have lost, but that didn't mean Mu Linger would win either. His scalp tingled at the thought of Mu Linger's bet. He prayed that Mu Ling would lose too. Rue started picking out the things he didn't want again. He picked out a lot and kept a lot. Han Yunxi's abacus, Chang Fei Ye's hidden weapons, Ning Jing's sword, and Gu Beiyue's seal were all left behind. There were also some scriptures, the 4 treasures of the study, and porcelain. Granny Zhao looked on helplessly. How was this a lottery? Rue, you want all these things. Han Yunxi sighed inwardly. So her son was also a greedy person. Rue didn't answer immediately. He looked around and picked up the abacus again. Han Yunxi was stunned. Chapter 1252. Rue grabbed the abacus again, and Han Yunxi's heart skipped a beat. If she lost, she would have to eat Long Fei Ye's noodles. Was Long Fei going to cook? Did he cook anything? Han Yunxi was extremely nervous, but her son looked at the abacus curiously, as if he didn't know what it was. However, he got bored after playing for a while. He took the abacus and walked over to little Tang Tang. Is this kid treating the abacus as a toy? Isn't that? Han Yunxi was about to speak when Long Fei Yi grabbed her hand so tightly that Han Yunxi didn't dare to continue, afraid that Long Fei Yi would crush her hand. Han Yunxi looked back, only to see Long Fei's lips curled into a smile as he looked at his precious son with interest. Sure enough, Rue treated the abacus as a toy and handed it to Tang Tang. It's yours. Tang Tang had seen her mother use the abacus before, and she liked it too. You don't want it? Tang Tang asked. No. Rue's sentence was Han Yunxi's death sentence. Long Fei Yi gently patted Han Yunxi's hand and let her go. Rue, do you want the rest? Long Fei Yi finally asked. Although Rue wanted a lot of things, he chose every one of them carefully and thought it through. He looked at it again and replied, yes. Ha ha ha. Long Fei Yi was in a good mood. Good. Excellent. Rue didn't know what their bet was and didn't understand what his father was so happy about. He picked up 2 books from the ground and ran to Gu Beiyue, asking him to teach him how to read. If Rue understood what happened today, he would definitely despise these adults who didn't sleep in the middle of the night, including his high and mighty father. Long Feiyi, Gu Beiyue, and Ning Jing all won. Long Feiyi turned to Han Yunxi and whispered in her ear, "Empress, I will personally make you a bowl of noodles later. Wait for it." Han Yunxi's expression stiffened. This concubine thanks your majesty for the reward." Long Feiyi was already in a good mood after winning the first birthday banquet. Seeing Han Yunxi's sullen expression, he was even happier and laughed loudly. Unlike Ning Jing, Tang Li was especially honest and said in a low voice, Jing, I really don't have much private money." "I'm already yours, what about money?" "What's the hurry?" Ning Jing asked back. "It's not a hurry, it's..." Tang Li was at a loss for words. He and Ning Jing's finances had always been separate, so of course, all the expenses were paid by him. It wasn't a big deal to let Ning Jing take charge of the finances, but the key was that with Ning Jing's shrewdness, he would probably have to ask her for permission to spend money in the future. Could he still happily buy? The winner had the joy of the winner, and the loser had the depression of the loser. Gu Beiyue wasn't in a hurry to find Gu to collect the debt. Gu also didn't care that he lost to Gu Beiyue, because his bet with Mu Ling was even bigger. At this moment, he was staring at Mu Ling. Mu Ling also looked at him, smiling sweetly. Anyone who saw her would feel that she was very happy. Finally, Gu couldn't help but ask loudly, "Zhao Mama, what did Ling bet on? Let me have a look." At this time, everyone who was immersed in their own victory or defeat suddenly remembered that the real winner between Mu Ling and Gu had not been decided yet. Although Gu Qishao had lost, it was possible that Mu Linger had lost as well. "Ling, what did you bet on?" Han Yunxi asked curiously, "Did you win?" Mu Ling smiled slyly and didn't speak. "It looks like you won." Han Yunxi was overjoyed. "What did you bet on with Qi brother?" Mu Ling smiled even more slyly, and that smile made Gu's hair stand on end. "Hee, we bet that if I win, Qi brother will kiss me. If I lose, I will be Qi brother's godsister." When Mu Ling said this, Han Yunxi almost fell off her chair. Long Feiyi looked at Gu in disbelief. Where did this guy get the confidence that he would definitely win? He actually dared to bet with Mu Ling like this. Gu Beiyue and the others didn't speak, and they all looked at the booklet in Zhao Mama's hand. Victory or defeat, it all depended on it. Zhao Mama handed the booklet to Gu, but Gu hesitated and didn't touch it. "Qi brother, you don't dare." Mu Ling laughed. Gu Qishao knitted his brows at her before taking the booklet. When he flipped it open, he saw that Mu Linger had written down none other than the words, "Classics." At this moment Rue, who was leaning against Gu Beiyue, was holding a scripture in her hands. "Qi brother, did I win?" Mu Ling asked loudly. Gu didn't speak for a long time. Han Yunxi came over and took the booklet. She couldn't believe it. "Ling won. Qi brother, kiss me." Mu Ling asked cheerfully, not embarrassed at all. On the other hand, Gu looked up and frowned. Ahem. Han Yunxi coughed lightly and got up to carry Rui. It's late, everyone should go and rest. Long Feiyi glanced at Gu with disdain, and was the first to leave. Tang Li and Ning Jing followed suit. Gu Beiyue was the last to leave. When they reached the door, he turned back and added with an especially harmless smile, "Shao Qi, settle the score with Ling first. We'll settle our score later." Who said that Gu Beiyue was a good person? He was full of evil tricks from the start. Gu wished he could send him flying with a kick. Everyone had left. The room was silent. Only Gu and Mu Ling were left. Mu Ling was still laughing and couldn't stop. She looked so happy. Gu sat there and was about to open the door when Lil Thing suddenly fell from the roof beam with a plop. Lil Thing had followed Mu Ling to Yuning Palace like a rat celebrating a festival. It didn't dare to find Mama Yunxi because Papa Long was always by her side. It didn't dare to show its face in front of its little master either. Whenever the little master saw it, he'd either throw it away or tug on its ears, tail, or even pluck out its most cherished fur. It could only wait for the gentleman to come. At this moment, the little master would not pester its young master. It could finally return to its young master's embrace. Lil Thing looked at Gu, then at Mu Ling. Actually, it had no idea what was going on, but felt that the two of them were a little strange. It was the middle of the night. Why hadn't a single man and woman left? Was there something important going on? Gu was already irritated, but Lil Thing's stare only made him more irritated. Did even this rat think that there was something going on between him and Mu Ling? What are you looking at? Gu asked. Lil Thing was about to chase after the gentleman, but when it saw Gu talking to it, it kept staring at Gu instead. Gu simply raised a foot and stomped down. Cheap! With a shrill squeal, Lil Thing's tiny figure disappeared under Gu's foot. By the time Gu removed his foot, Lil Thing's round body had already turned flat. If Long Fei Yi and his son saw this, they'd definitely treat Lil Thing like a rat. Mu Ling burst into laughter and quickly picked up Lil Thing. She tugged at its limbs, tugged at its tail, and twisted its head. Lil Thing was completely listless. It realized that being stomped flat was worse than being thrown out. It didn't want to move at all, only play dead. Chi brother, if you lose, then you lose. Why take it out on Lil Thing? It didn't defend you. You're not going to go back on your word, right? Mu Ling asked. Gu didn't make a sound. Mu Ling said again, Chi brother, if you can't afford to bet, then you shouldn't have bet with me. If it was in the past, Mu Ling definitely wouldn't talk to Gu like this. She wouldn't mock him or provoke him, she would only beg him. Gu frowned. No one knew what he was thinking about, so he didn't notice Mu Ling's strange behavior. Gu, say something. Mu Ling asked again. Gu suddenly stood up and walked towards the door. Mu Ling was slightly startled, but she didn't stop him. However, Gu didn't want to leave. Instead, he went to close the door. He closed all the doors and windows. From the moment he returned to Mu Ling, he didn't say anything. He bent down, tilted his head, and got close to her face. His lips were especially close to hers, hovering around as if he would kiss her at any time. His hot breath scattered on her face, so clear, so real. Mu Ling froze. She thought she had already let it go. She just wanted to play a joke on Chi brother. She came back this time not only for Rue's first birthday party, but also for Chi brother. She wanted to acknowledge Chi brother as her godbrother for life. If they were destined not to be as close as lovers, then they must be as close as family. It was just a bet, a win or a loss. He was willing to accept his loss.